This young man is an E-rank adventurer possessing only a single skill immunity. Therefore, the only job he could do was gather herbs in a dungeon at the very bottom of society. To make matters worse, the unlucky young man was betrayed by his teammates and thrown straight into an abyss, out of food, out of items, and on the brink of death. It was a desperate situation for survival. Rust risked it all and ate monster meat. At first he thought he would surely perish in this dark dungeon, but unexpectedly not only did he survive, he unlocked an incredibly overpowered new skill, which was the ability to absorb the skill of the monster whose flesh he ate. In his world, eating monster meat was considered a taboo, because for humans doing so meant embracing the nature of a demon. However, for a young man like Rust, who was at the bottom of society with no way out, things like morality and nature meant absolutely nothing. The first symptom he felt after tasting the monster meat was a strange sense of exhilaration, as if his body was being strengthened to its maximum potential. Immediately after, the second symptom hit a terrible headache, nausea and poisoning. The third symptom was sudden death. In other words, this was the final step for Rust to completely absorb the monster's abilities. Soon after, Rust adapted to the symptoms, and mastering his new skill pressed his advantage. He then continuously charged forward to smash the monsters in the face, while also eating them and absorbing their skills. Although he had to face countless dangerous monster types, with his strong survival instinct and deep-seated hatred, Rust wasn't scared or hesitant. Instead, he yearned even more to live, to return home and slap the faces of the animals who betrayed him. Moreover, everything had started a few days prior. In the border city of Bologna, a place considered the capital of countless mysterious labyrinths, it always attracted a large number of adventurers seeking fortune. Among them, the most prominent was the miasma dungeon, shrouded in a toxic fog year-round. Normally, other adventurers despised and rarely set foot inside the miasma dungeon. But for an adventurer with an immunity skill like Rust, entering and exiting this place was completely normal. After all, his livelihood depended on gathering medicinal herbs in this dungeon to sell. Occasionally, he would also encounter some low-level monster types like these miasma rats. Although Rust himself was immune to the rat's poisonous gas, his combat ability was basically crap, so he was quickly at a disadvantage. Luckily, some other adventurers passed by and lent a hand. At a glance, these three people seemed quite friendly. However, Rust had seen them many times at the Adventurers Guild and knew full well their intentions weren't simply to help him, so he just thanked them politely. Just as expected, a second later, the fat one told the other two to quickly gather herbs from the spot he had just cleared. At that moment, the young man realized that these three cunning individuals had been following him all along to leech off his work and take the remaining herbs. Of course, these three were not happy about having their true colors exposed. They immediately turned the blame on him and threatened him with violence. Rust knew for sure that he was no match for them, so he had to swallow his pride and bow his head in apology. That evening, even after returning home, Rust couldn't find peace due to the harassment and troublemaking of other adventurers. These scumbags often used their strength to bully and mock him, calling him a worthless eyesore. They looked down on his immunity skill as useless in actual combat. Although he was furious with these two, Rudd couldn't do anything but endure it. Partly because what they said was true, and partly because he couldn't fight back against them. In truth, deep down, Rudd felt utterly helpless because this useless skill often got him ostracized in the world of adventurers. Even though he was a grown man, strong and able-bodied, he still struggled to fight even a few small mice. The next morning, as usual, Rudd went to the Adventurers Guild to find a quest to make a living. But he noticed that today seemed noisier than usual. Just then, the gal at the reception desk told him that a new dungeon had just been discovered. This meant a new treasure trove was opening up for young adventurers to plunder. No wonder everyone here was so lively this early in the morning. Then the receptionist informed Rudd of another important piece of news. Starting today, the price of the herbs he usually sold had dropped from 100 coins to just 30 coins. Because people would now focus only on the new labyrinths and dungeons, they were no longer interested in the miasma labyrinth. Not stopping there, the gal also warned him not to enter the new dungeon because the exploration requirement was D rank or higher. Unless he joined a party, he was better off staying home. While he was awkwardly wondering what to do, a kind young man offered him a spot in his party to carry some items. At first, everything seemed normal. The blond young man even introduced his party members to Rudd. First was himself Bayer, the leader of the Scarlet Shot Party. Next was the red-haired girl named Zaxa and the guy with the mohawk named Rick. All three of them were D-rank adventurers. Rudd alone was E-rank. Soon after, the four of them arrived at the entrance of the Avalio Labyrinth. Initially, they were very excited, hoping to make a decent profit. But they never expected the place to already be packed with other adventurers, and some were even busy snatching up the early spoils. With the current situation, if Rudd's group didn't quickly come up with a battle plan, they would end up with nothing. Just then, Rick the Mohawk guy suggested they go deeper into the dungeon where there were fewer people, making it easier to score loot. But Rudd didn't quite agree because this was after all a newly discovered and unexplored dungeon. For the sake of their survival, he felt they shouldn't take risks and should stick to the first floor. Hearing this, the other two immediately flew off the handle. As for Bayer, he was calmer, but he also agreed with going deeper inside. Since he couldn't convince the other three, Rudd had no choice but to follow them. Very quickly, the group reached the fourth floor of the dungeon. This meant more dangerous types of monsters would appear, but contrary to Rudd's fearful and cautious mood, the three of them, Bayer, Rick, and that gal Zaxa, seemed extremely thrilled about slaughtering this pack of wolf monster creatures. Right after finishing off the monster pack, the Mohawk guy ordered Rudd to quickly collect the items. He quickly explained that because the monster corpses were severely damaged and even the magic stones were shattered, he couldn't collect all the items. But the Mohawk guy wouldn't listen to a word and stubbornly insisted that he had to get it done no matter what. Although R knew for sure that he was being intentionally hazed, he had to endure it when considering the power difference between them. To make the collection easier, R used the small amount of fire magic he possessed, a basic but useful skill. But upon seeing this, the loudmouths Rick and the girl over there started running their mouths. Haha, look at that guy starting to burn the monster's corpse. What the heck is he trying to do? Eat it. Speaking of which, we've been exploring this dungeon for quite a while now. I'm starting to get hungry. The monster meat doesn't look so bad now that you mention it. Get real, that's disgusting. Even if eating it wasn't taboo, no one could predict what would happen when a large amount of mana invades the body. This was likely one of the most important reasons why everyone was wary of eating a monster. Since this was a game of survival with only one life, no one dared to gamble with their own. Just as the group was distracted and chatting, a B-rank Minotaur monster suddenly launched a surprise attack, throwing everyone into an extremely dangerous situation. Based on his many years of combat experience, the moment he saw the Minotaur, both the spiky-haired guy and the girl knew for sure that their party lacked the skill to defeat it. Right at that moment, Bayer told Rudd to quickly lend him his backpack to find a combat item. Rudd naively believed him. He took off his backpack without hesitation and handed it over. But he never expected the scumbag to pull such a dirty trick. As soon as he got what he wanted, he didn't hesitate to land a painful slash on Rudd before pushing him toward the monster to buy time for them to escape. It was only then that Rudd realized the three of them had planned from the start to use him as a sacrificial pawn in case of danger. But by the time he saw the true colors of these animals, it was already too late. Rudd could only watch bitterly as those scoundrels fled with the pile of items. More importantly, he was now facing the Minotaur alone. But how could the main character possibly die like this? Just as its first axe swing was about to come down on him, Rudd quickly dodged it. However, he was completely exhausted and took a direct hit from the monster's attack. Just as the monster was about to continue its physical assault, the wall behind them couldn't withstand the immense force and collapsed, causing both of them to free fall into a deep abyss. Fortunately, with the Minotaur as a cushion after falling hundreds of feet, Rudd was still alive and kicking. But he realized that death would come sooner or later, as his current condition was absolutely terrible. If he didn't die from blood loss, he'd be devoured by another monster. Furthermore, he had no food on him at the moment. After lying in one spot for a long time, Rudd was so hungry he couldn't think of anything but food. He began to recall the rumors that eating monster meat was taboo because it would corrupt humans into demons. But standing on the brink of life and death, a young man from the bottom of society who had been pushed into a corner like Rudd no longer cared about such ridiculous morals. Now there was only one thought in his mind: survival at all costs. He decided to risk it all and eat the Minotaur's flesh. In reality, if a human abandons their own magic to eat mana-rich monster meat, the monster's mana will invade their body. This state is known as becoming a monster. A truly horrific state, even more terrifying than being tormented by chronic poison. In these moments of desperate survival and helplessness, to recover his lost health and satisfy his hunger, Rudd took a gamble. One that would change the entire course of his life. It was an unexpected transformation that even Rudd himself never saw coming. After experiencing a series of symptoms, feeling pain that racked both his body and mind, our main character was now nearly insane, as if he'd lost his mind. He no longer cared about anything else, focusing only on using every skill from the monster he had just absorbed to tear apart the other creatures inside the dungeon. More accurately, Rudd had completely transformed into a true monster and began his very first hunt for survival. He single-handedly declared he would take on every monster in this dungeon. Immediately following was our main character's great slaughter. Despite facing dozens of bloodthirsty monster creatures, in his frenzied state, Rudd was even more bloodthirsty than them. He feared nothing and just relentlessly skewered and devoured each monster with a terrifying skill. After an unknown amount of time, when Rudd finally reached the gate of the dungeon, everyone had already left long ago. But he didn't really care anymore, because now seeing the sunlight once again, he could truly feel that he was still alive. At the same time, at the Adventurers Guild headquarters, those three scumbags were busy explaining the reason for Rudd's death in the dungeon to Lankus, the guildmaster of the Bologna branch. The hypocrite Bayer claimed that the unfortunate Rudd was killed by the Minotaur monster as soon as he set foot on the 4th floor. Everything happened so fast that they had no chance to protect the poor victim, all while putting on an exaggerated look of sorrow and sympathy. Just as everyone was being manipulated by these animals, our main character suddenly appeared, looking as cool and handsome as a god to the astonishment of all the adventurers present. The first to react was the phony Bayer. As soon as he saw Rudd had returned alive, he quickly ran over, pretending to be deeply concerned. But it was actually to whisper a warning to him not to reveal the truth to everyone. Then that guy Mock and the woman Zaxa also quickly composed themselves and feigned affection, asking about his condition. In short, this group was not only beastly, but also completely shameless. If it were the weak Rudd from before, he probably would have silently endured it. But now he was in a new position, so he no longer feared these scumbags. Not wanting to waste any more time listening to their nonsense, Rudd directly exposed their hypocritical facade in front of everyone. They used me as a sacrificial pawn. Bayer stole all my equipment and attacked me from behind. Rick used a dirty trick to lure the Minotaur monster towards me, and that wench Zaxa supported the two of them so they could all escape. Faced with Rudd's accusation, the phony Bayer still wanted to deny it, but Lankus gave him no chance to explain, directly summoning a truth officer to verify the facts. Even they never expected that a high-ranking figure like a truth officer who rarely leaves the royal capital would appear in a small border town. At this point, Lankus slowly began to explain that due to too many unusual deaths of temporary members in their Scarlet Shot party, he had personally invited a truth officer here to investigate. Immediately after, the truth officer used his ocular skill to check them and quickly concluded that the three Bayer, Rick, and Sasa were lying, while Rudd's words were the truth. At this point, everything had been brought to light. However, the hypocrite Bayer stubbornly refused to admit his guilt and even turned to question the truth officer's skill. Hearing this, Guildmaster Lankus was left speechless, because everyone in this kingdom knew for a fact that the truth skill was a unique and divine skill. No lie could ever slip past this ability. Therefore, Bayer questioning the truth officer's ability was completely absurd. This even showed that he had a guilty conscience about what he had done. Immediately, Lankus saw through the true colors of these three. He then interrogated them and declared their crimes in front of all the adventurers present. Abandoning your comrades is one of the greatest taboos for an adventurer. Not only that, you intentionally attacked your own comrades, using them as sacrificial pawns in a twisted bid for your own survival. If we continue to investigate your crimes, I am certain that your careers as adventurers will end here, and all of you will be turned into slaves. Hearing this, they could no longer remain calm. Bayer even went berserk on the spot, grabbing his sword and charging at the truth officer with the intent to retaliate. His sudden action was so fast that the people around them didn't even have time to react. But just as his blade was about to touch the truth officer, Rudd managed to block it and landed a punch right on his face, sending him flying. Afterward, Rudd was invited by Guildmaster Lankus for tea in the headquarters lounge. Those three scoundrels were also arrested by soldiers and taken away for interrogation. Lankus also told him that if they had indeed used previous temporary comrades as human shields, they would certainly be stripped of their adventurer licenses and turned into slaves. As for Bayer, for the crime of intentionally attacking a truth officer, he would likely be sentenced to hard labor for the rest of his life and would never appear before him again. Of course, they would lose ownership of all the items they had acquired in the new dungeon. And to compensate for Rudd's losses, Lankus decided to exchange it all for about 200,000 rin and gave it to him. It wasn't until he was leaving that the poor young man still couldn't believe he was holding such a large sum of money for the first time. With this, all his living expenses for the foreseeable future were covered. He knew that if he had continued just selling herbs, it would have probably taken a lifetime to earn 200,000 rin. As expected, being an adventurer was the easiest way to make money in this world. At that moment, Rudd guessed that he might have become famous after the incident, so he quickly left the headquarters to avoid unfriendly stares from certain individuals. At the same time, to avoid suspicion, Rudd decided he would continue selling herbs. Now that he had a decent amount of money, he really wanted to improve his quality of life. First, he would go to an equipment shop to buy some necessary items like a magic bag, and then he would treat himself to a grand meal. The next day, Rudd went to the Miasma Labyrinth dungeon as usual. The only difference being that this time, he could easily defeat the swarm of rat monsters inside. He then used the analysis skill of another monster to learn all the information about the rat monster. From his observation, Root learned that this monster swarm of rats were mostly at level 9. Next, he opened his status card to check and was surprised to find that his current level had risen to 42, even though it was only at level 7 yesterday. After that, the young man opened the skill section and discovered that he had absorbed a series of incredibly powerful new skills. At this moment, Root remembered a strange incident on his way back. He noticed the wall that should have been destroyed by the Minotaur monster was still completely intact. But because the new dungeon would be closing soon, he had no choice but to continue exploring the miasma dungeon for his survival. Right now, he was eager to test his new power, so he decided to go big by venturing deeper into the lower floors he had never dared to explore before. He started hunting each monster from the 6th floor, then the 7th all the way to the 13th floor. But the weak monster types here weren't challenging enough, so he decided to go deeper to find more suitable prey. Sure enough, upon reaching the 24th floor, Root encountered a higher level monster. As soon as he grasped its basic information, he immediately drew his sword and charged in for a fight. But he never expected this monster to turn and flee instead of fighting. Immediately, Root gave chase. But when they reached a dead end, the monster suddenly stopped and looked at him with a triumphant gaze. It was at this moment that he realized he had fallen into a trap set by the cunning monsters. Now Root was pushed into a desperate situation for his survival, surrounded by the monster pack from front and back. One monster charged forward to launch a preemptive strike. Fortunately, he skillfully parried the blow. In this situation, Root decided his survival depended on taking them down one by one to carve a path out before launching a swift counterattack. In the middle of the struggle, Root happened to notice a suspicious monster watching everything from a distance. He immediately activated his observation skill to check it out and discovered that this monster was the leader of the entire pack. It seemed the boss monster sensed the danger from Root, so it signaled its underlings to finish him off quickly. But the main character wasn't going to be an easy meal. Immediately after, he channeled all his strength, used one monster as a springboard, and launched himself towards the boss. In the instant before impact, Root raised his sword to land a fatal blow. However, he never expected that this boss monster had a skill that made it invulnerable to blades. In Root's moment of carelessness, the boss seized the opportunity and landed a blow. The attack was too fast for him to dodge, and he took a direct hit. But luckily, our hero also possessed a damage nullifying skill just like the monster, so he was unharmed. It was then that he suddenly felt something was off about this monster. He clearly remembered attacking the boss with all his might, but somehow it remained completely unharmed without even a single scratch. Furthermore, when he checked earlier, he didn't see any recovery skill or other special abilities, but after a moment of observation, Root finally discovered this monster's secret. It turned out that one of them possessed a damage transfer skill, so all the wounds inflicted on the boss were being redirected to that monster instead. As soon as he understood the key to the problem, Root quickly switched his target to the monster with the transfer skill, finishing it off with a single blow to prevent further complications. Seeing that its trump card had been eliminated, the boss monster and its underlings went berserk, immediately charging in to tear Root to shreds. But Root reacted in time. He immediately used his web shooting skill to cling to the cave ceiling, then followed up with the all-encompassing net skill to trap them. At this point, the outcome was clear, so he wasted no more words and directly decapitated the boss monster with his sword. Of course, the remaining creatures couldn't escape their fate either. After completely wiping out the horde of monsters, it was time for our hero to start feasting on them. Thanks to the compensation money from the Adventurers Guild, Russ was able to buy an expensive item like a magic bag. It was a wondrous item with an incredibly vast space inside, large enough to hold many cumbersome items without inconveniencing its user. That's why for this expedition into the dungeon, Russ could bring along pots, pans, and even cooking spices to improve his meals. Last time in the Avalio dungeon, it was a dire survival situation, forcing him to risk eating the monster meat raw. In reality, he much preferred to enjoy his food properly cooked. As expected, after being marinated with spices and cooked, the monster meat looked far more appetizing. The mere smell made Russ's mouth water uncontrollably, and he couldn't resist taking a huge bite, savoring the fresh, rich flavor of the meat. He probably never imagined in his entire life that eating a monster, something considered taboo, could bring such a blissful and wonderful feeling. On top of that, it also granted him countless overpowered skills. By now, Roos had acquired a considerable amount of power from the monsters. Besides the skill sets from the Minotaur, the spider monster, and the eye monster, there were still many skills from other creatures he had yet to test. Right after eating his fill, Russ was eager to descend to the deeper floors of the dungeon to explore. Before leaving, he also carved some meat from the monster that had a swapping skill and then quickly set off on his hunt. On the lower floors, Roos encountered many types of high-level monsters gathered in packs, but he only needed a single move to defeat them all before proceeding to cook their meat for another feast. While he was enjoying his delicious meal, Russ suddenly heard human voices in the distance. He immediately packed up his meal and hurried over to see what was going on. Over there, a group of adventurers was cornering an injured girl. One look was enough to tell that this group was up to no good. Then one of them stepped forward and pulled back her hood, revealing the beautiful face of a young elf maiden, a rare race that fetches a high price on the black market. No wonder this group was targeting her so specifically. However, before they could make their move, our protagonist suddenly appeared, interrupting them. A one-eyed man, seeing the stranger approach, immediately became wary and demanded to know who he was, to which Russ replied with an incredibly smug attitude that he was just an adventurer. At that moment, the elf girl behind them shouted a warning to Russ, telling him to run because they were adventurer hunters. Hearing this, he dropped his smug attitude and began to seriously assess his opponents. He had heard that most adventurer hunters were top-ranked individuals. As expected, the one-eyed man's current level was 65, which was much higher than Roos's. In fact, his level was too low to even view the man's class or skill set. The same was true for the other three men. Realizing the situation was tense, Russ guessed they likely possessed either a concealment skill or some special magic tool. However, before the young man could even react, the one-eyed man grew impatient and ordered the other three to make quick work of him. Hearing this, the blonde-haired guy immediately charged forward, intending to land a critical strike on Russ. His movements were so fast that our hero could barely block the attack. He had to use all his strength just to temporarily ensure his survival. Despite being at a clear disadvantage, the young man's sharp tongue was still running wild. "It's not that I'm strong, you're just too weak." The man flew into a rage after being taunted, but because of that, he accidentally revealed an opening for Roos to counterattack with a poison skill. It took him out of the game for good. Seeing this, the two guys behind him frantically started cursing Roos for playing dirty. But sorry, in a battle for survival, I only care about winning. Concepts like playing fair mean nothing. At this point, the one-eyed man, the leader of the group, picked up on a clue about Russ's unique skill and immediately became wary. He no longer underestimated the boy's capabilities and seriously ordered the remaining two to gang up on him. It seems the survival game just got harder, so Russ had to focus intently on observing them to dodge their attacks and find an opening. But before he could counterattack, the one-eyed man took advantage of his inattention, using a powerful skill to ambush him. Unfortunately, this time the young man couldn't dodge, and he was kicked straight into the pond behind them. Seeing Russ struggling, exhausted, and trying to flee, the long-haired man was incredibly smug, planning to chase him down and finish the job. But the one-eyed man stopped him, warning that this was a poison swamp, a natural dungeon where going too deep without protection would be a death sentence. He figured that in a swamp like this, it wouldn't be long before Russ was forced to come back to shore. So all they had to do was lie in wait for him to deliver himself to them. At that moment, seeing he wasn't being followed, Russ had already figured out their intentions. However, they had no idea that Russ possessed an immunity skill to him. A mere poison swamp was nothing. Furthermore, prolonged exposure to the toxic fumes would surely drain an adventurer's energy, making survival difficult for them. At that point, they would be the ones at a disadvantage, and just as Russ had predicted, after only 10 minutes, they were already starting to show signs of exhaustion from the poison. In reality, Roos knew it wasn't the perfect time to strike yet. If he waited a little longer, his chances of winning would be higher. But given the state of her injuries, the elf girl probably couldn't hold on for much longer. Therefore, he decided to go ashore and deal with that monster of a man and his lackeys. When they saw Russ returning, they were thrilled, thinking he had finally given up on fighting back. However, at this point, Roos decided not to hide his power any longer and laid all his cards on the table. What a pity. Because my survival skill makes me immune to all poisons, I really can't imagine the pain you guys are in. The one-eyed man now realized they had been completely played by Russ, and he furiously ordered the other two to eliminate him quickly. The masked man immediately charged in to fight, but since his strength had been severely weakened from inhaling the poison, Russ could now easily overpower him. The long-haired man took advantage of the moment Russ was struggling with his comrade to slash at his lower back. But he had no idea that our hero also possessed a defensive skill, rendering his attack completely useless. Once he was tired of playing around, Russ unleashed a fatal lightning skill, directly sending the masked man to the afterlife. The long-haired guy, being a bit more resilient, still had enough strength to rush in for a counterattack. Coincidentally, Russ was looking for a target to test a new skill, so when the man charged, he unleashed it without hesitation, sending him to the grave to keep his two comrades company. By now, only the rat-faced man was left, completely bewildered after witnessing our hero's series of overpowered skills. He was so shocked that he couldn't help but exclaim, "What the hell?" How on earth can a human possess the skill of a monster? Naturally, Rudd felt no need to answer his question. He quickly closed the distance, engaging in a fiery exchange of swordplay and slowly pushing the man onto the defensive. In the final moments of the battle, the one-eyed man desperately activated a skill to enhance his own strength. He planned to land a fatal blow that would take them both down together, but unfortunately against Rudd's main character Aura, all his resistance was futile. His struggles were completely useless. Russ instantly activated a muscle enhancement skill of his own, cleaving the man in half. Afterward, Russ had to admit the man was genuinely strong. If not for his own extraordinary skills, he would have been the one lying on the ground. But the reality was that the ultimate victory belonged to the only one left standing, Rudd. After taking care of the 4 so-called adventurers, Rudd was finally able to help the girl and give her first aid for an open wound. The girl was incredibly grateful to have been saved by such a handsome and kind young man during her time of distress. At a glance, the girl appeared to have recovered, but based on his own assessment, Rudd guessed she was just toughing it out as her body was still suffering from the effects of the miasma. It struck him as highly unusual to find an elf in this miasma because rare races like elves typically live within a specific isolated region. They keep to their own territory and rarely venture out, let alone enter a dangerous dungeon to explore. The fact that she was being hunted here by adventurers also struck him as odd, and he couldn't quite grasp the situation. At that very moment, a giant hornet monster appeared out of nowhere, ambushing the pair. Rudd recognized it immediately as the boss monster of the swarm from before. After a quick assessment, he charged in to engage it in combat. However, dealing with this monster proved to be more difficult than he anticipated. Its attacks were so swift that Rudd was almost struck before he even had a chance to react. It even came dangerously close to striking the elf girl. Seeing this, Rudd began to get serious. He immediately retaliated with fierce determination. Even though the monster was now significantly wounded, it continued its desperate survival attempt by spitting a paralyzing poison at him. Just as Rudd was feeling confident due to his immunity to the poison, he never suspected that the cunning monster would aim for the girl behind him and not at him. Fortunately, the girl was no pushover herself, so she instantly dodged the attack and launched a counter of her own. Afterward, the two of them teamed up and successfully put the monster down for good. However, the girl then suddenly collapsed in immense pain, making Rudd extremely worried. He thought the poison was finally taking effect, but the girl quickly denied it. She insisted she was fine and asked him to help her escape the dungeon, promising to tell him her story in exchange. Soon after, Rudd brought the girl outside into the fresh air. By this point, she was already feeling much better. Furthermore, feeling that Rudd was someone she could trust, she decided to tell him her story. But first, she introduced herself as Alicia, a former adventurer. The moment he heard the name Alicia, Rudd was extremely surprised. He immediately asked if she was the famous adventurer known as the Emerald Gale. The girl was overjoyed to see that he knew of her. In his world, Ludia was a kingdom famous for its S-rank adventurer parties, with the most prominent being so incredibly talented that all its members were widely known and sought after. However, a tragic incident 5 years ago completely destroyed the party. It was the event where they were defeated by powerful monsters on the deepest floor of an S-rank dungeon, the Bussin dungeon. In that battle, their captain was torn in half. One of Alicia's comrades was so severely injured that they had to retire, while another was consumed by the darkness of the dungeon, failing their struggle for survival. Alicia was the sole survivor to escape with her body intact. However, a mysterious curse known as the Downgrade Curse was branded onto her body at that moment. She explained this while unfastening her clothes to reveal a portion of the curse's seal to him. Seeing this, a guy like Rudd, who had been single for over 20 years without so much as holding a girl's hand, felt quite flustered. Furthermore, he had never heard of a downgrade curse in the world of adventurers, which made him quite curious. In truth, Alicia didn't have any concrete information about this type of curse either. She shared that she had tried numerous methods to break it, but all her effort could only slightly slow down its progression. Those 4 adventurer hunters from earlier were pursuing her precisely because they knew about her curse and sought to exploit it. Being afflicted with such a curse made Alicia feel completely and utterly helpless. Despite her extensive research, the only thing she knew for certain was that her existence would be erased once her level dropped to 0. After hearing Alicia's entire story, Rutt suddenly conceived a breakthrough to help her neutralize the curse. It involved using the swap skill that he had acquired from a lizard-like monster. Specifically, this skill allows the user to select a target and then transfer all physical damage from themselves to that target and vice versa. Rutt then asked Alicia to let him try something, as he'd hoped the method was truly effective. The moment he used the swap skill, the curse began to gradually transfer from her body to his. At this point, Alicia finally realized Rutt's method and purpose. She immediately told him to stop fearing the curse would harm him. However, Rut remained calm as he deployed his skill, reassuring her not to worry and to just trust him. After a short while, Alicia's curse had completely transferred to Rut's body. At the exact moment the curse was about to activate, he quickly used his nullification skill to completely erase it. Finally, he told Alicia to check her status card to see if the curse was still there. The moment she saw her status card had returned to normal, Alicia finally believed that she had escaped the torment of that wicked curse. Rut then briefly explained his method. It was all possible because he possessed a unique immunity and nullification skill which was key to his survival against the curse. Overjoyed after such a long period of suffering, Alicia's emotions were a bit unstable. At first she even questioned Russ on why he would risk so much for a stranger like her, but was then moved to tears thanking him deeply and sincerely. Once everything was smoothly resolved, Russ took the opportunity to invite the beautiful woman for a drink in the city of Bologna to let loose. After a little booze, Alicia was having a blast, completely forgetting about her earlier wound. She went all out without a care in the world. She downed several large mugs of ale one after another without hesitation. Afterward, the two had a great time chatting and drinking together. During their conversation, Russ asked Alicia about her future plans, but was surprised when she replied that she wanted to know more about him instead. First and foremost, she wanted to hear the story of why he decided to become an adventurer. Now that their relationship had grown closer, he didn't hold back and told her his story directly. A long time ago, the village where Russ lived as a child was ravaged by a horde of monsters. All of his relatives and family and friends were all killed in that incident. He should have perished along with everyone else. But an S-rank adventurer arrived just in time to slay the monster and ensure his survival. He would never forget the brilliant light that radiated from that hero for the rest of his days. It was because of this glorious moment that Russ became determined to become an S-rank adventurer so he could save as many people as his savior had. Alicia was completely captivated as she listened to his story. She shared that when she was a child, she also wanted to become an S-rank adventurer to become stronger. She wanted to freely battle against more powerful types of monster. Of course, this was her dream before she faced a crushing defeat in a dungeon and was cursed. But now that she had successfully broken the curse, Alicia expressed her desire to become Russ's partner and form an adventuring party with him in the future. But before Russ could even reply, the two jerks who had bullied him before suddenly appeared, completely ruining the mood. Remembering the past humiliation made Russ absolutely furious. To make matters worse, they dared to touch Alicia's hand. A hand he hadn't even touched yet, so he couldn't hold back his anger and was ready to take them outside for a talk. Just then, Alicia spoke up, suggesting they resolve the conflict peacefully with a drinking contest. The side that could drink more would be the winner. End of discussion. What followed was an epic showdown. The young Alicia took on both guys by herself, fueled by the cheers and enthusiastic shouts from the other patrons in the tavern. After a tense battle, the two guys were utterly defeated, and so Alicia was the ultimate victor. Her tolerance for alcohol was simply legendary. After the contest ended, Russ and Alicia quietly found a corner to talk. He was very curious, wondering why she had stepped in to help him like that. Alicia explained that since they were now comrades, she would never let anyone bully him. As she was talking, Alicia suddenly passed out from the alcohol. Luckily, Russ was right there to catch her. Seeing her completely drunk, he didn't know what else to do but use his nullification skill to help her sober up. Moments later, Alicia was completely sober without a trace of alcohol in her system. Once she realized that Russ's special skill could sober her up instantly, she happily went right back to the drinking table. They continued until they had drunk their fill and were completely worn out. She then demanded to try the tavern's special fish dish, but the owner refused because this fish was actually a type of monster that was quite rare at the time. Seeing that Russ and Alicia were adventurers, the owner hired them to go to the Banabot fishing grounds to catch this particular fish monster. The next day, the two of them boarded a boat to the destination and quickly spotted the fish the owner had requested. However, they soon realized something was wrong. They were surrounded by dozens of the same monster. Russ and Alicia were thinking, wait a minute, didn't the tavern owner say this was supposed to be rare? Russ immediately went on high alert, using an appraisal skill to check their stats, and discovered this monster possessed an incredibly powerful underwater combat skill. Immediately after, they all launched a relentless coordinated attack on the duo's boat. Realizing that this situation required more than a conventional approach for their survival, he decisively jumped into the water to handle the threat. With a single lightning attack, Russ took down quite a few, but he noticed many more of the monster creatures remained in the deeper water. Strangely, these ones didn't attack back, but simply remained stationary below. Russ guessed they were either on high alert or protecting something in this watery dungeon. To satisfy his curiosity, he decided to swim deeper. At this point, Roos was very close to the fish monster school, but they still had no reaction to him and didn't attack, nor did they flee his approach. This bizarre behavior made him even more certain they were protecting something deeper down. It wasn't until Russ swam deep enough to see the lakebed that he truly understood what the monster school was guarding. It turned out to be a colossal monster. His first impression was that this creature had a very strange appearance, with the body of a crab but with numerous tentacles sprouting from its shell, and it remained almost completely motionless at the bottom. Upon closer inspection, he was astonished to discover that the large monster's scaly-tipped tentacles could detach and transform into smaller fish monsters. At this point, Roos felt the monsters were merely living symbiotically and posed no real threat, so he decided to return. But who could have guessed that these cunning creatures would spring a trap the moment his guard was down? The large monster used its tentacles to drag him down by the leg, while the smaller fish monster minions swarmed in to attack him all at once. Only then did he realize this was why they hadn't attacked initially. It was all an elaborate act in their fight for survival meant to lure him into a vulnerable position. Since it had come to this, he decided not to hold back and unleashed a powerful skill to wipe them all out. However, as soon as it sensed the danger from Roos's attack, the large monster quickly retracted its electrocuted tentacles to preserve its life. It then lunged forward to attack. At that very moment, he was running out of oxygen and had to tug the rope signaling for Alicia on the boat to pull him up quickly. Upon receiving Roos's distress signal, she used all her strength to pull him out of the water. Even though the monster school was in hot pursuit, he fortunately managed to shake them off. In the end, they successfully completed the mission assigned by the tavern owner, though Roos looked a bit worse for wear after his struggle for survival. He later told Alicia what he had seen underwater and that the large monster was still spawning more minions. Hearing this, Alicia became very worried, unsure of their next move as she knew they were at a great disadvantage fighting such a dangerous monster in its underwater territory. Actually, Rudd already had a plan in mind to destroy the monster horde with his exclusive devouring skill. The only problem was that revealing his ability to absorb a monster's skill after consuming it was an extremely difficult secret for him to share, a secret crucial to his survival. However, when Rudd thought back on how Alicia had trusted him with the truth about her curse and the good times they shared, he decided to reveal this secret. He also made sure to remind her never to share this with anyone else. After taking a bite of fish sashimi, Rudd quickly dove into the water and used the fish monster's swimming skill to adapt to the underwater environment. From there, he easily defeated countless monsters in his path, skillfully weaving through the large monster's tentacles to deliver a fatal blow. Finally, the large monster that was the source of all the problems was completely destroyed. Rudd guessed that in the near future, this area of water would soon return to its former peaceful state. Right now, his biggest worry was that Alicia had witnessed him devouring the fish monster sashimi. He really wondered how she must have felt at that moment. What would she say when he returned very soon after? Rudd surfaced and quickly looked around for any sign of Alicia. When he couldn't see her there, he felt a bit disappointed, assuming she had been frightened by the earlier scene. But just then Alicia appeared, leaving him utterly astonished. It turned out she had only gone into the forest to gather some firewood to keep Rudd warm. Seeing that Alicia wasn't scared and was even treating him so kindly, he felt a bit flustered and asked her, "Aren't you afraid after seeing me devour that monster?" When asked, she answered sincerely that she was a little surprised at first. But the fact that he trusted her and revealed his secret made her happier than anything. After they opened up to each other, it seemed their relationship had grown much closer. Afterwards, Rudd dragged over a part of the large monster's body to absorb its skill later on. He also took the opportunity to catch some specialty Banabas fish for Alicia to snack on. As evening fell, the two of them began to feast, enjoying the fruits of a hard day's labor and chatting happily with each other. At that moment, Alicia brought up her offer from the previous night again, inviting Rudd to form a party with her. After hearing this, Rudd didn't answer her right away, thinking for a moment before asking if she didn't have any stronger acquaintances. It seems the young man was still insecure from his time as an E-rank adventurer who was looked down upon by others. Alicia also confided that it had been 5 years since she was cursed, and even if her old teammates hadn't died, they couldn't clear a dangerous dungeon together for long. Because a human's lifespan is very short compared to an elf's, her relationships were generally quite limited. On top of that, she had been betrayed by some people when she was in trouble. She even thought she would never trust anyone again. Not until she met someone like Rudd. She decided to open her heart one more time, hoping he would agree to journey with her in the future. With the beautiful woman expressing herself so sincerely, how could Rudd possibly refuse? In the end, they both agreed to partner up. The next morning, Rudd and Alicia returned to the Adventurers Guild headquarters at the Bologna branch. Alicia in particular was extremely excited, hoping to get a quest as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Rude standing beside her looked utterly bored with life. Because he was still an E-rank adventurer, he knew for sure that the quests available to him would be very limited. Even so, Alicia remained optimistic and cheerful, quickly pulling him to the reception desk to pick up a job. The moment she saw the prestigious S-rank guild card of the famous Alicia, the receptionist was so shocked her eyes nearly popped out of her head, and at the same time she was extremely curious. She couldn't understand why such a renowned top-tier figure would team up with a rookie like Rude. When Alicia heard Rude being bad-mouthed, her face immediately fell and she shot a glare that made the receptionist flinch. Afterward, the two asked the receptionist to find them the most difficult quest available, something truly epic. Soon after, the pair arrived at a forest near Bona to handle a wolf pack that was showing signs of a population explosion. After Rude made a few basic moves, sending about 10 of the beasts to the afterlife, Alicia then jumped in to provide support. It could be said that the two were now coordinating seamlessly and had found a perfect rhythm with each other in combat. Alicia was already incredibly strong, but now she had also summoned a spirit for support, making her power and fighting prowess truly top tier. Just as the wolf monster pack was about to charge in and attack, she unleashed a powerful spell that sent them all to their graves in an instant. Rude, watching from the side as Alicia massacred them, was completely stunned. She was truly worthy of being an S-rank adventurer. It seemed she had recovered a fair amount of her former strength after her curse was broken. Just then, a monster took advantage of their distraction and leaped to ambush Rude from behind, leaving him no time to react. Luckily, Alicia was there to use her magic and save his life from the wolf's jaws. Given the situation and the number of monsters before them, Alicia thought they couldn't let their guard down for a moment in this fight for survival. Furthermore, she noticed that the entire pack hadn't appeared yet as she spotted another 5 monsters lurking in the bushes over there. Hearing this, Rude immediately used his bat-like echolocation skill to scan the area, only to discover there were still over 30 more hiding in the shadows. He immediately pointed out their specific locations to Alicia so she could launch an attack. However, Rude realized another disadvantage. His echolocation skill lost its accuracy in the open space, and Alicia couldn't hit too many targets at once. If they continued like this, they would soon be exhausted before the monster pack was completely wiped out. Therefore, Rude switched to a different strategy, focusing the attack from one side to herd the creatures into a single spot. After asking Alicia to do so, Rude used an anesthetic skill to knock the wolf monsters unconscious and then quickly finished them all off. Finally, the two of them checked the total number of the monster pack. A grand total of 52 had been slaughtered that day. Alicia was very surprised by this number, but Rude was calmer. He guessed this monster pack could have grown even larger if it hadn't been discovered by humans. At this point, he asked her about the spirit by her side. Alicia explained that she could use magic to temporarily borrow power from spirits. These entities exist only in nature, and this time she had summoned a spirit named Sylphie. In fact, spirits in general are everywhere. Although they don't usually materialize before humans to use their power, the summoner must offer their own magic as a medium of exchange. This allows the summoner to wield powerful magic with just a fraction of the usual mana cost. And as Rudd had witnessed earlier, the spirit could even cast a spell to let him fly. Truly, for a young man who had lived at the bottom of society for so long, experiencing high-level magic like a spirit for the first time was incredibly impressive. Although this little spirit was a bit mischievous, her immense power was undeniable. By now it was starting to get dark, so Alicia suggested they return to the city of Bologna by using Sinfi's magic again for a quick trip, while the two were flying back. Rudd then asked Alicia more about the types of magic spirits she could use. In fact, the abilities of the spirits she summoned usually leaned towards water, ice, light, and earth, while spirits possessing dark or fire abilities were not a good match for her. Alicia also explained that if a spirit was incompatible, the summoner would have to expend a massive amount of mana in exchange. In many cases, the spirit would not even lend its power. As they were chatting happily, Rudd suddenly noticed unusual plumes of smoke rising in the distance. Without hesitation, the two quickly headed over to see what was happening. It turned out a village was under attack by a monster. A few adventurers were trying to take the monster down, but it seemed like everyone there was too low level to be a match for it, making their survival a desperate struggle. Just as a young man was about to be killed, Alicia and Rudd arrived in the nick of time to save him. As soon as they understood the situation, Alicia and Rudd charged in to help the other adventurers, especially Rudd the moment he saw the monster. He immediately activated his eye skill to check its stats. Although this monster's level was lower than the lizard monsters in the dungeon, its stats were quite high and it possessed a diverse skill set. This meant it was much stronger than the typical monster he had encountered before. Just as Rudd predicted, the moment it saw him charge in with his sword, the monster unleashed fire element magic to fight back, Meanwhile, his own fire magic was too weak to withstand the monster's relentless barrage of attacks. This looked like a tough fight, but the more ferocious the opponent, the more Rudd wanted to devour it. That way, he could obtain this monster's powerful fire magic skill for himself. But before his blade could even touch it, the monster managed to block the attack with its claws. It then seized the opening to attack with fire magic at point-blank range. Fortunately, at the last second, Rudd managed to leap back and dodge it. This startled him for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure and carefully observed his prey. The fire around the monster was still blazing fiercely, but thanks to the protection from its two wings, it remained completely unharmed. At this point, Alicia suggested to Rudd that they should temporarily retreat because the monster was now on high alert. Besides, many villagers had not finished evacuating yet, and their survival was the top priority. Moreover, her mana was nearly depleted from the earlier fight with the pack of wolf monsters. Therefore, they could not summon and borrow a spirit's power. However, if they left now, they would very likely lose track of the monster. Therefore, Rudd realized he had to do something quickly to solve this problem. To find a way to achieve a perfect outcome. Alicia, who was by his side, seemed to sense his intentions and proactively offered to support him with her magic crucial for their survival. Upon hearing that, Rudd no longer hesitated and immediately drew his sword, charging toward the monster. Meanwhile, Alicia used her water magic from behind to counter the creature's powerful fire magic attacks. Thanks to her support, Russ was able to easily close the distance to the monster. But who would have guessed? This monster also possessed the skill to use earth element magic to attack him. Fortunately, Alicia realized this in time and used wind magic to block the attack, allowing Russ to close the remaining distance and land a precise finishing blow. Even though it was struck and on the verge of death, the monster still tried to launch a final counterattack to take Russ down with it. Of course, Alicia wasn't about to let that happen. She immediately used fire magic herself to finish it off for good. The vicious monster was finally defeated by the combined efforts of Russ and Alicia, much to the astonishment of the village. A few villagers and one adventurer were injured, but thankfully their survival was secured as no one in the village was killed. Immediately afterward, Alicia approached the villagers to check on the situation and was warmly welcomed by a red-haired young man. Seeing his enthusiasm, she took the opportunity to ask him for a small favor. She asked if they could spare some food for her to eat. Elsewhere, Rutt was waiting for Alicia in a forest near the village. As soon as he saw her return, he asked about how the village was doing. Alicia explained that there were no casualties because other adventurers had evacuated everyone beforehand. Their only problem now was figuring out how to rebuild the village. Alicia also mentioned that she had told everyone the monster escaped and that the two of them were going to hunt it down to eliminate it for good. This way, no one would question the disappearance of the monster's corpse and Russ could eat it in peace. Right after that, it was time for our hero's familiar feast. Unlike before, this time he decided to try preparing the monster's meat into a delicious soup. He added some herbs, making it absolutely perfect. After the very first bite, Russ felt an explosion of delicious flavor in his mouth. Although the meat had a slightly gamey smell like goat, it was still quite palatable. Moreover, the most important thing was that he had absorbed many new skills the kind adventurers risk their lives for in a dungeon. Seeing Russ eat so heartily, Alicia, who was sitting next to him, felt a bit envious. But the moment she remembered she would have to eat a monster that looked vaguely human, she completely abandoned the idea of trying it because it felt way too creepy. After hearing what Alicia said, Russ suddenly found the meal a lot less appetizing. On the other hand, he began to question himself for getting so used to eating a monster. Just then, a herd of wild boars suddenly appeared, catching the attention of the pair. Alicia immediately stood up to teach them a lesson, but Russ suddenly stopped her with a mysterious expression. You would think it was something serious, but it turned out our hero just wanted to use the boars to test his new magic skill. However, life is rarely so simple. Even though he tried to put on a show, not a single spark of magic appeared. At that moment, both of them just froze with blank expressions on their faces. It wasn't until one of the wild boars charged directly at them, knocking over Russ's pot of soup, that the two snapped back to reality and realized Russ couldn't use magic at all. This was despite having eaten the meat of that powerful monster. Alicia started to worry, afraid she couldn't handle these boar-like monster creatures now that they were completely out of strength. However, in stark contrast to Alicia, Russ's attitude and mood were somewhat unstable at the moment. It had taken a great deal of time and effort to cook such a delicious pot of meat soup. But before he could even take a few bites, this monster pack arrived, caused a ruckus and made it explode, so our hero was now incredibly furious. Alicia, watching from the side, was at a complete loss for words. How could he be worried about food when their survival was on the line? He was even about to charge in and slaughter them, but Alicia calmly pulled him back and guided him on how to handle the situation step by step. She realized this particular monster only had a single skill super speed, so they needed to fight from a distance to prevent them from using it. Therefore, the survival tactic Alicia chose was to flee to preserve their lives. After quite some time, the two managed to escape the monster pack by hiding up in a tree. Alicia then asked Russ why he couldn't use magic earlier, and he admitted that he had never been able to use any magic-related skill before. She immediately suggested that Russ should check his status to see what was going on. Agreeing it made sense, he quickly opened his status card and discovered that the two new magic elements he acquired both stated that the owner of this skill would instinctively understand how to use. Alicia figured the high probability reason Russ still couldn't use magic was likely because his mind was too simple to grasp the principles and fundamentals of magic usage. However, the strange thing was, he could still use a tiny bit of weak fire magic, so he wasn't completely incapable of using it. Just then, Alicia suddenly thought of a possibility that to use the magic skill from a monster, Russ needed to learn how to channel mana, and upon hearing Alicia's explanation, Russ finally began to understand. It turned out the key wasn't magical power but mana itself. He immediately tried to channel it, recalling his first experience absorbing a monster in the Avalio dungeon, specifically that explosive burning sensation of power. He believed that if he could replicate that sensation in his body one more time, he would likely be able to channel mana and cast magic. And just as Russ predicted, he succeeded on his very first attempt using that method. This meant that as long as Russ could sense mana, he could wield it as if it were a part of his own body. Without hesitation, he immediately unleashed a new skill to turn the monster boars below into roasted pork. And so after the ruined soup, our hero now had pork cutlets on the menu, but unlike Russ's carefree and happy mood, Alicia was now quite seriously focused on his abilities, as his success in channeling mana and using a magic skill on his very first try had left a deep impression on her. Furthermore, Alicia noticed that Russ's mana hadn't been depleted by that powerful attack, so she believed he could likely use it repeatedly, and she was right. Because as Russ felt the mana flow throughout his body, he instantly understood how to use the magic skill. If mana could substitute for magical power, he could probably do something similar, like using mana to enhance his body or weapons. In the world of adventurers, many improve their combat skill by learning to circulate magical power throughout their bodies, a crucial tactic for survival. Physical abilities will be significantly improved, and if magical power is infused into a weapon, its attack power will definitely increase immensely. Hearing Russ's explanation, Alicia finally understood the problem. It was because he had too little magical power until now that he couldn't use that particular skill. But on the other hand, Russ had more mana than magical power, and more importantly, he could replenish mana by eating a monster. In other words, Russ could absorb mana through food and store it in his body. Especially in Alicia's eyes, right now the pork on Russ's cutlet looked incredibly appetizing, so much so that she was drooling just from the smell. Seeing this, Russ immediately invited her to have a bite, but before she could even respond, a monster launched a surprise attack on them. It turned out to be the boss of that small boar herd coming to settle the score. As soon as it spotted its target, it charged toward Alicia, leaving her no time to react. Fortunately, Russ was nearby and quickly moved her out of the way. Actually, Alicia's moment of distraction was because she was shocked by the appearance of a monster that was supposed to be inside a dungeon. How in the world did it appear outside? And once again, the food Russ had painstakingly prepared was ruined by this beast, making him absolutely furious. But unlike last time, the young man didn't dare charge in anymore because this monster was too ferocious. Charging in now would be a death sentence. This boss monster not only possessed fire element magic, but it was also a sustained type, causing its entire body to be constantly ablaze, and its stats and level were also extremely high. As soon as he grasped the basic information, Russ immediately used an earth element magic skill to counter it. But unexpectedly, this monster also possessed an invulnerability skill, so his attack didn't even faze it. It even quickly seized the opportunity to charge and ram him, almost taking him out. Right after that, the monster charged toward Alicia again, planning to finish her off. Fortunately, she managed to summon her spirit familiar in time and counterattacked. Although this move was temporarily effective, she realized that this kind of survival tactic wasn't a long-term solution. This was because this monster wasn't using any special skill like the previous ones, but was only focused on attacking head-on with its horns and muscles. Furthermore, neither earth nor wind magic could restrain it. While Alicia was contemplating her next move, the monster prepared to charge and attack again. However, this time before it could strike, it was startled and frozen in place by Russ jumping up. It seems that after lying under the tree for a while, the young man had come to his senses. He began to seriously face the monster one-on-one and re-evaluated the entire battle. He knew for certain now that he couldn't use any skill like super speed or body enhancement. If he tried to fight a war of attrition, there was a high chance it would switch targets and attack Alicia. In this situation, finishing the monster in a single blow was incredibly difficult. However, Russ still wanted to test his luck. Just as the monster was about to hit him, he stood his ground defiantly and raised his sword to the sky, as if mentally preparing to face the enemy. At that moment, the flow of mana began to boil within his body. He immediately channeled mana into the sword in his hand, waiting for the perfect moment to land a critical blow and split the boss monster in two. In short, Rudd defeated the monster in just a fleeting moment. Aya witnessed the whole thing and was completely stunned. She never expected he could successfully use his enhancement skill on a weapon for the first time without any practice, a true testament to his survival instincts. Our young man was still looking cool and collected at this point. That is until the sword shattered because it couldn't withstand the force. He then felt a gut-wrenching sense of regret. But regardless, a hard day of survival had finally come to an end. On the 7th floor of the Miyamas dungeon, the three guys who previously leeched herbs off Rudd were fighting with all their might against a monster, and it seemed they had successfully defeated the boss of the rat monster swarm here. While they were feeling extremely smug about their achievement, one of them was suddenly drawn in by someone's whisper and turned into a secret passage nearby. The other two saw this and followed him. After going down a small staircase, they entered a room and discovered a treasure chest. Since it didn't look like a trap, the three of them boldly opened the chest and found an incredibly cool sword. The moment he held the sword, the black-haired guy immediately said he felt a surge of magical power flowing through his body. Hearing this, the portly guy next to him wondered if it was a cursed item, but the other guy dismissed it as a joke. Besides, he felt that they had all worked very hard since one-upping Rudd, so this was likely a gift from the gods. After hearing that, the black-haired guy nodded in agreement with him. As for the portly guy, although he felt a bit uneasy, he had no clear proof and gave up on persuading his two comrades. In the end, the three of them left happily, completely unaware that they had stumbled upon something dangerous. Meanwhile, in the city of Bonarud and Alicia were strolling through town to buy a new weapon to replace the one that broke yesterday. Soon after, Rudd led her to a weapon shop. When the shop owner saw the terrible condition of the sword, he was utterly astonished. He immediately asked what on earth had happened to require using the sword to this extent. Actually, this old man's name is Gem, an acquaintance. He had helped Rudd many times before and could be trusted. Right after Rudd told him the whole truth, including the part about him consuming a monster. Once he understood the full story, he realized this was the reason for Rudd's recent surge in power. Even so, Alicia noticed that he didn't seem very surprised to learn this. Indeed, the old man remained very calm because to him, as long as it was good for Rudd, nothing else mattered. Furthermore, the old man agreed to craft a sword that could withstand a large amount of mana, and Rudd just needed to wait a while for him to research suitable materials. Actually, Rudd had already thought about this issue and had prepared a few monster crystals to show him. Looking at the high-grade crystals displayed on the table, the old man couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Rudd's skill level had truly improved a great deal. Being praised like that made the young man quite happy. Thus, the immediate problem of materials was solved. But the old man still needed more time to forge the sword, so he told the two of them to go home for now. He would let them know when it was finished so they could pick it up later. In the meantime, he lent Rudd a temporary sword to use. Of course, it was on the condition that Rudd absolutely must not channel mana into it or break it. Otherwise, the old man would surely deal with him the next time they met. Afterward, Rudd and Alicia went to the tavern for dinner as usual. While the two were enjoying a pleasant conversation, three scumbags from the dungeon approached them to chat and insisted on joining their table. However, before they could even start any trouble, the black-haired one suddenly collapsed onto the food to the complete astonishment of everyone around. His companion saw this and stepped forward to ask, "Hey buddy, what the hell are you doing? Are you drunk or something?" As he got closer, he discovered that the black-haired man hadn't sold the strange sword from the dungeon and was still clutching it tightly. Furthermore, the sword was now emitting a red magical aura and began to whisper bizarre sounds. A moment later, the black-haired man suddenly sprang up and slashed at the person closest to him, his own companion. He didn't stop there. He continued to swing his sword wildly at Alicia and everyone around him. Luckily, Rudd reacted in time to block his attack. Even Rudd himself had no idea what the hell was going on with this guy. The other patrons in the tavern, after witnessing his deranged behavior, quickly rushed forward to subdue him. But under the sword's influence, the man had completely lost all reason. He struggled with all his might, breaking free and wounding another person nearby. Seeing that the situation was quickly spiraling out of control, Alicia had no choice but to ask for the owner's permission before casting a spell blowing away the black-haired man and half of the tavern along with him. However, even after taking a direct hit from Alicia's magic, the black-haired man got back up as if nothing had happened. The two were stunned by his resilience. The next moment, he charged towards Rudd, his face contorted and drooling like a rabid animal. He fiercely declared that he would send Rudd to his grave. Seeing his audacity, Rudd refused to hold back and charged forward as well. The moment their swords clashed, Rudd immediately sensed something was off. His level was only average, yet his other stats were abnormally high, making it incredibly difficult for Rudd to fight him. As he was locked in a fierce struggle, Elysia from behind suddenly shouted for him to get out of the way so she could use her magic to finish this rabid dog. But surprisingly, all of Elysia's magic aimed at the black-haired man was completely absorbed by the sword. No wonder back at the tavern, he had been completely unharmed by her attack. Elysia finally realized the true danger wasn't the man, but the mysterious sword he was holding, and he was just a parasitized host. She immediately warned Rudd that he was wielding a cursed sword. Furthermore, it seemed Elysia's recent magic attack had unintentionally empowered the sword, causing the black-haired man's power stats to rise at an alarming rate. He even began to sprout grotesque tentacles, turning into a true monster. This fight was becoming extremely disadvantageous for Rudd. He had to use every survival skill he knew just to parry the man's attacks, taking a long while before finding an opening to strike his thigh. But he immediately realized another problem. At the spot where his blade had just landed, the tentacles quickly sealed his wounds and stopped the bleeding. At this point, Elysia, observing from the side, was growing very anxious. Unfortunately, there was little she could do because if she continued to attack with magic, the sword would surely absorb it all to increase its power and put Russ in grave danger. Elysia began to consider finishing off the host, who was the black-haired man, in order to render the sword inert. However, the heavy-set man pleaded with them to generously overlook their past conflicts and not harm his brother. In reality, Russ paid no mind to any of that. He was fighting simply because he wanted to destroy the monster. That was all. Although the fight was intense and Russ was giving his all in the final moments of the battle, he managed to pinpoint his opponent's weakness and quickly used earth magic to restrain him. But it didn't end there. Since he couldn't use magic for a conventional attack like Elysia, he took a gamble by using the same method he once used to break her curse, his exchange skill to try and free the black-haired man. Using the exchange to expel the dark energy of the demon sword from the man's body was no easy feat. After a long and arduous struggle, Russ was only able to draw a small amount of it out, but he never expected its power to be so terrifying. Just a brief touch was more than he could bear, forcing him to release it immediately. Thus, the plan to use the exchange skill had failed. Furthermore, the magic holding the black-haired man was also about to give out. At this moment, Russ realized that the man himself didn't seem to be resisting his skill. It was the sword that was controlling his body and forcing him to fight back. With no other options, he had to revert to a direct assault to change the situation. And as soon as he broke free from the restraint, he, under the monster's control, immediately charged at Russ. Fortunately, Russ managed to dodge and counterattack. But if this kept up, he would certainly be exhausted soon. This desperate battle for survival was as grueling as any deep dungeon crawl. Therefore, he decided to try and separate the cursed sword from the man's arm by focusing his attacks on the right side. However, the black-haired man's movements suddenly became more agile and unpredictable, making them impossible for Russ to foresee. More importantly, the demon sword began to absorb his magic to increase its power. Sure enough, a second later, the demon sword completely unleashed its power and fully assimilated the black-haired man's body. At this point, its form was no longer human, but had completely transformed into a two-headed demon. Faced with this horrifying sight, Russ was nearly impaled by the fiend. Luckily, thanks to his main character plot armor, the young man managed to avoid death. Even so, he still took a punch right to the face. Just as the demon's sword was about to lunge forward and claim his life, Elysia charged in to rescue him just in time, unleashing a burst of magic to create distance between them. By now, both of them recognized that the monster before them was no longer an opponent they could take lightly. Simultaneously, Elysia reminded Russ that he needed to change his mindset and fighting style. The curse on this man had progressed so rapidly that the only way to end it was to destroy his heart. This meant that Russ would be forced to eliminate the black-haired man if he wanted to finish off this demon for good. Although he was reluctant, Russ finally gritted his teeth and decided to sacrifice the black-haired man. As for their accomplice who was slashed earlier, he lost his composure upon hearing Elysia's words and ran over to the heavyset man for confirmation. Immediately after, both Elysia and Russ rushed in with a barrage of attacks to take down the monster regardless of the cost. While Elysia and her summoned spirit attacked from the front, distracting the monster's attention, Russ would circle around to strike from behind and vice versa. Basically, the two used a strategy of taking turns to land their blows. You may have two heads, but there are two of us. Let's see who's afraid of whom. Moreover, they attacked relentlessly, giving the monster absolutely no chance to counterattack or recover. After a long struggle, the two of them finally located its heart. If they could just destroy this, victory would be certain. Of course, the monster wouldn't let that happen easily. Seizing a moment when Alicia was distracted, it launched a surprise ambush. But the heavy-set man and the injured one risked their lives rushing in to block the demon's sword and save her. To everyone's astonishment, it didn't stop there. The two of them joined forces to finish off the monster with their own hands and send their friend on his final journey. Although it was excruciatingly painful, they actually managed to do it. After a tense struggle, the two of them succeeded in destroying the evil monster. But this meant their friend could no longer go on living. More heartbreaking still, the evil monster's dark energy had corroded the victim's body. Seeing this, the two men couldn't contain their grief. Their tears fell, marking a tragic end to the game of survival. Although the person was gone, the cursed sword remained. This forced Rut to handle it personally to prevent any future disasters. However, the moment he touched it, the sword unleashed an incredibly terrifying killing intent, threatening to send him to his grave. An ordinary person would have been scared out of their wits seeing this. Unfortunately for the demon's sword, it ran into a guy as tough as Rut himself. He could casually take down dozens of horrifyingly dangerous monsters in a dungeon, so this paltry killing intent was nothing to him. Now, after everything was over, the branch manager hurriedly arrived and gathered everyone directly involved in the incident to take their statements. Afterwards, Manus, being both directly involved and knowing the origin of the demon sword, told the manager everything he knew. However, besides the recent events, he was also very interested in why Rut remained unaffected despite direct contact with that demon sword. Hearing the branch manager's question, Rut didn't hide anything and frankly explained that it was all thanks to his nullification skill, which was why the demon sword's dark energy couldn't manipulate his mind. Furthermore, he also stated that as long as he kept the item with him, there would be no more victims. The branch manager was an intelligent man and immediately understood Rut's intention to possess the demon sword. However, he was still fearful of the consequences it could cause. It wasn't until Rut gave his firm commitment that the manager agreed. It didn't stop there, as the branch manager proceeded to inform them of some important news, that the number of monsters escaping from the dungeon and wreaking havoc in the surrounding areas was increasing abnormally. Recently, it was discovered that most of these monsters were coming from the newly excavated Abelio labyrinth. The scouting team even discovered the cause of this phenomenon to be the appearance of the poison dragon Basilista, the monster at the top of the food chain within that dungeon. In fact, information about this particular monster is extremely scarce. Even the branch manager himself, despite his many years of experience, had only ever read about it in ancient texts. And according to the researchers and the scout team, the poison dragon that has appeared this time could very well be level 70. Not to mention its incredibly powerful combat abilities. Its skill at spreading poisonous gas alone is an extremely difficult problem. Even the other monsters inside the dungeon can't withstand this poison, let alone humans. In fact, a few members of the scout team were instantly eliminated just by coming into contact with it. As for the lucky ones who made it back, they are currently undergoing intensive treatment. The branch manager predicts that if this situation continues, it won't just be the monsters, but human survival will also be at stake. In the worst-case scenario, the poison will spread outside the dungeon and lead to a catastrophe for the entire surrounding area. This was also the reason why he sought out Rut today, an adventurer with the skill to neutralize and resist poison. After hearing the whole story, Rut finally understood his responsibility in this matter and agreed. But first, he wanted to go and check on the condition of the scout team members. The branch manager then led him and Alicia to the infirmary. After confirming the poisoned man's condition, Rut used his transfer skill to draw the poison into his own body and completely neutralize it. It only took a moment. The poisoned young man was completely cured and no longer in pain. After witnessing this, the branch manager was utterly astonished, never imagining Rut could do something so incredible. However, Rut explained that he could only do this with compatible individuals, so for this mission to eliminate the poison dragon, he hoped that only he and Alicia would participate. Upon hearing this request, everyone was completely shocked, thinking Rut must be delusional. How could a normal person dare to make such a bold claim? Even the branch manager was extremely skeptical of his request and asked him to confirm it again. However, his mind was made up because for him this wasn't just about protecting innocent people. Fighting powerful foes alone was what he had always done. Seeing that he couldn't convince the young man, the branch manager had no choice but to approve Rut's request, adding that he had great faith in his abilities. He hoped Rut could make mincemeat of that poison dragon. Finally, both Rut and Alicia left late that night. At that point, Alicia asked Rut why he had requested a two-person mission. Of course it was so he could go all out against that monster without holding back. Even so, he now felt a little guilty. He apologized to Alicia for dragging her into this mess. However, Alicia didn't mind at all. She had always believed that they were a team, so any mission he took on, she would be there too. In short, both of them had great faith in each other and in the success of this mission. After all, to Rut, a measly poison dragon was just another meal, so this was no big deal. The gate slowly opened. This was the Abellio dungeon on its lower floors. A system window appeared showing information for a level 20 goblin monster. Status affected by poison gas. The monster's full stats appeared as it launched its attack. Status HP 123, Magic 74 Strength, 107 Spirit 81 Endurance 92, and Agility 96. Skill Physical Enhancement, Mace Mastery. Without a moment's hesitation, Lute thrust his sword forward, finishing it in a single strike. Afterward, he said, "It's almost exactly like what we heard from the rankers. We still need to clear at least 5 more floors." I hadn't heard anything about the corruption spreading this deep into the dungeon, though. Alicia then added that this just shows how fast it's spreading. Even with my purification items, it seems we're having a harder time cleansing the miasma. Furthermore, she felt it didn't look quite right. There are many monsters still alive on the next floor. Hearing that, Lute started to ask, "I don't know how many more floors we have to get through. So are you sure you don't want to?" Before he could finish, she interrupted and answered, "Of course." She then declared in a single breath, "Your attributes might not be effective against this type of monster. Even if a situation arises where close quarters combat is unavoidable, I'm confident I can still land a few good hits." With that, she declared with determination, "If our survival means I have to run away and abandon my friends again, I'll never be able to forgive myself." Her words prompted a sincere reply from Lute. "I'm sorry I made you say that again." Then, he placed his hand on her shoulder and called her name Alicia. A sudden surge of power erupted from his touch. He smiled knowingly and said clearly, "I'm going to use a skill to substitute your miasma status." This left Alicia so astonished her eyes widened. Lute then removed his hand from her shoulder and said hesitantly, "That's just what I expected. I can nullify the effect for you whenever we're in contact, but the moment I let go, it will slowly start to accumulate again." Suddenly, she gave a peculiar smile and began to speak hesitantly. In that case, before she could finish, she suddenly grabbed Lute's hand and flashed a bright smile while suggesting, "Let's just hold hands and keep going then." After her unexpected action came her suggestive proposal. "I can't see my feet very well because of all the miasma, so in addition to using your skill, please escort me too." Her expression made Lute smile helplessly and sigh, and he actually agreed to her request to hold hands, which made her jump for joy. Understood. A short while later, in the middle floors of the Abellio dungeon, a voice rang out, "The deeper we go, the thicker the miasma gets." Lute said in a serious tone, "I've used my echolocation skill and it looks like there are 2 monsters ahead of us." Alicia agreed with his assessment. If they can survive in this miasma, their survival instincts must be strong, making them formidable foes. As soon as she finished speaking, he added, "They're unlike any monster I've ever seen before, so that's highly likely." Suddenly she asked, "Is there a way around?" He answered bluntly, "Yes, but if possible, I want to fight them." His words left her stunned. Then Alicia suddenly exclaimed, assuming he wanted to defeat them. Hearing her say that, Lute quickly waved his hand in denial. "No, that's not it. Although I am a little curious." He then touched the sword at his hip and explained, "The cursed sword Graham. Before we face the miasma dragon, I want to test it." The sword's information panel appeared. Cursed sword Graham. Anyone who wields the sword will have their consciousness sealed and fall into a berserk state. At that very moment, 2 monsters crawled out from the darkness. They were rolling beetles level 33, afflicted by a poison gas status effect. Their stats were 161 HP, 151 magic, 27 strength, 192 spirit, 214 durability, 205 agility, and 88 skill, with abilities like Transform Steel Body and Poison Resistance, Poison Gas Resistance, and Paralysis Resistance. Without a hint of panic, Lut raised his hand to open a magic circle, and suddenly a strange light appeared from the ground. The moment he invoked the principles of earth magic, a powerful explosion erupted, sending the 2 rolling beetles flying into the air. This scene made Alicia exclaim in admiration, "Well done." However, Lut hesitantly uttered, He looked at the 2 rolling beetles which were not yet defeated and stated, "It seems like that wasn't very effective." His attack had only angered them and they roared. One of the 2 beetles suddenly lowered its body. It transformed itself into a large iron ball and charged towards Lut, who realized it was rolling up. An idea sparked in his mind and he quickly turned to ask Alicia. "Can you stop it?" Alicia confidently replied. "Leave it to me. I need to let go of your hand for a moment." And after letting go of Lute's hand, she loudly summoned a lesser spirit, Noemiah. She held it forward and commanded, "Make sure you catch it." As soon as she finished speaking, something suddenly rose up in front of her. It was a wide-open hand of earth preparing to catch the rolling beetle monster. Just as it charged forward, the hand swiftly blocked it. However, the monster was too strong and Alicia couldn't hold it for long. Sorry, it seems I can't stop it for much longer. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Lut stepped forward and said, "Understood, I'll test it out immediately." He drew the sword Graham from its sheath and the eye on the blade opened. In his heart, he was telling himself, "Don't you dare break." As soon as he thought it, he opened his eyes. With superior speed, he slashed through both the stone hand and the rolling beetle inside. The monster took Lut's blow and fell to the ground. He quickly realized his slash lacked power. It was too shallow. Now the rolling beetle monster was even more furious, but Lut remained calm, thinking if it's not strong enough, I guess I'll have to take a risk for our survival. At that moment, he called out loudly to Alicia. His call was a signal she understood. Just as the rolling monster prepared to attack again, Alicia suddenly unleashed her power. Her power infused the sword Graham with magical energy. The sword didn't hesitate to absorb the mana to empower itself. Its power was now enhanced. The moment the rolling beetle monster charged towards Lut, an immense power radiated from the sword Graham. Lut smiled and thought, "Let's do this, Graham." Just as he shouted in his mind, "Show me your true power," he also delivered a fatal slash to the monster. The rolling beetle monster was killed with a single slash, and the one who wielded that deadly blade was none other than Lut. The other one behind him saw its companion die so horribly and began to tremble all over. However, he showed no mercy. A fatal thrust into the ferocious monster made it shriek, and then after a brief struggle it too died. After that slaughter inside the dungeon, Lut said cheerfully, "That was masterful magic control." "As expected," Alicia replied happily. "That went quite well." Suddenly, he took her hand and cast a spell. Instead, his action moved her to utter 2 words. "Thank you." He then suddenly became flustered and asked her, "So can I have a little more time?" Seeing that Alicia didn't seem to fully understand his words, Lut hesitantly explained, "No, absorbing magical power doesn't actually restore the energy in my body." Hearing him say that, she immediately understood the issue and continued, "So you're still going to eat them in the end?" Seeing that she finally understood his predicament, he shyly said, "Look, I'll cut it into pieces and take it with me." A moment later, in his hand was a cut of meat from the 2 monster creatures which he was roasting to perfection using a fire magic skill. While chewing the meat, he commented, "The flavor is quite unique." Just then, Alicia suddenly asked, "So what's it like using the cursed sword?" Lut answered without hiding anything. "Once it absorbs enough magical power, my physical abilities are definitely improved significantly." Hearing him say this, she seemed to notice another issue. And on top of that, it seems like it won't break even if you infuse it with mana. Of course, he admitted to this. That's right. However, there was also something weighing on his mind. It's just that I'm worried that according to witness reports, the miasma dragon monster is as big as a giant tree. From that, he always had a question. I wonder how effective this sword will be. In terms of the power behind a single attack, my previous sword was better. While Lut was talking, a voice suddenly rang out, "Give it to me." The voice came from the sword Graham. "Give it to me." This startled him and he wondered. Cursed swords eat meat too. As if understanding his thoughts, the sword immediately denied it. "Wrong," it whispered, guiding him. "The magic stone, give me the magic stone." Listening to it, he quickly knelt beside the corpse of the roller beetle monster and pulled a shining magic stone from its body. Then he brought the stone close to the sword. "Here." Immediately, Graham used its tentacles to wrap around the magic stone. It slowly brought the stone inside itself. And once it had completely consumed the stone, a strange light and power suddenly erupted. This made Lut so happy he burst out laughing. Looking at the transformed sword in his hand, he exclaimed, "What a huge sword." Just then, Alicia asked curiously, "How did you know?" He answered honestly, "It spoke directly into my head." He looked at Graham and wondered, is it annoyed because I said it was weaker than other swords? Knowing he wouldn't find an answer just by thinking about it, he decided to put the matter aside. "Anyway, I've now figured out how to use this cursed sword skill." Hearing this, Alicia quickly reported the situation. "Alright then, the lower floor of this dungeon is where the miasma dragon was last seen." Just as she finished speaking, a roar echoed. The sound made Lut uneasy, and he asked loudly, "Is that the roar of the miasma dragon?" Suddenly the ceiling cracked and water started dripping down. The sight made Lut anxious and he shouted loudly, "The ceiling is about to collapse. We need to support it with an earth magic skill." Realizing the survival situation was dire, Alicia quickly pointed out that if we only try to protect ourselves, the stairs will be blocked and we'll lose our chance to fight the miasma dragon. So she hurriedly summoned her spirit. In that case, before it collapses, the cracks in the ceiling began to shatter. Alicia moved faster, breaking through the cracks to charge out. "We're going to break through." Large boulders began to fall one after another. Alicia led Lut as they rushed outside. Her eyes were filled with determination while Lute gritted his teeth as she pulled him along. After running for a while, the two spotted a door. Luck was on their side as they managed to dive through it just in time. Both of them landed safely. Once the danger had passed, Lute smiled gratefully at Alicia. "Thanks, I thought I was going to die." But she simply said, "I used up a considerable amount of magical power." Afterwards, the two continued onward hand in hand. After a moment, Lute exclaimed, "This dungeon floor is quite dark, isn't it?" To ensure their survival while moving, he quickly suggested, "I can still use my thermal scan skill if we advance slowly while searching for enemies." The moment he used his thermal scan skill, he accidentally saw something, and he hesitated before speaking. It seemed he had spotted something enormous in a dark corner. "It's coming from the other side." It turned out that what he saw was the final boss monster. This is the poison gas dragon Basilista. The dragon monster's information panel appeared. Poison gas dragon. Basilista, level 75. Stats: HP 524 MP, 377. Strength 445, Spirit 365, Durability 422, Agility 200, Night Vision Paralysis, Resistance Fire, Resistance, Lightning Resistance, Earth Resistance, Dragon Scales, Poison Stinger, Poison Gas Wave, Principles of Earth Magic, Principles of Dark Magic, Dark Resistance, Petrification, Resistance, Corrosion Resistance. This data panel made Lute exclaim, "Level? Its agility isn't very high, but its vitality is over 500. Even Alicia was astonished by the sheer number of skills this monster possesses. Staring at the razor-sharp claws on its feet, she spoke hesitantly. "Its fangs and claws are venomous." Just then, the Basilista monster let out a deafening roar. It advanced towards them, making them realize the situation. "It spotted us." Without a moment's hesitation, Lute quickly told Alicia what kind of magic it could resist. Magic resistance fire, earth lightning, and dark. Upon receiving this information from him, she immediately replied, "Understood." She knew what she had to do next. "I'll use other attributes." Seeing that she was ready, he shouted, "Let's go!" A determined reply escaped her lips. "Yes." At the same time, the Basilista roared thunderously, and Lute quickly yelled, "Let's do this together." Alicia's eyes were now intensely focused, preparing for the fierce battle. The Basilista monster let out a terrifying growl. Lute began to strategize on how to fight it. "I want to keep my distance and observe from afar until I can figure out its attack pattern." But he glanced worriedly at Alicia. "In this dense poison gas, I don't know how long Alicia can last." This fight was a matter of survival. Just as he was thinking that he needed to end this as quickly as possible, something made his eyes widen in complete shock. A faint light flickered in the darkness and the thick poisonous smoke. The Basilista monster breathed out a ferocious stream of fire. Sensing the danger, Lute used a flash step skill to dodge. The Basilista's flames pierced through a stone pillar in the dungeon chamber. This scene left Alicia bewildered as she exclaimed, "The pillar and the floor are melting." Looking at what was happening before her eyes, she could only think, "The temperature is terrifying." The Basilista monster was now focusing its attacks solely on Lute, while he desperately tried to evade its strikes. Seeing him being cornered like that, Alicia quickly began a summons. "Spirit!" Obeying her command, the small battle spirit quickly moved to assist him, increasing his speed to ensure his survival. Seizing the opportunity, he quickly slashed at the Basilista monster, but the attack failed as its hide was too tough. Seeing the gash was merely a scratch on its body, he suddenly recalled another of the monster's abilities, the Dragon Scale skill, and quickly assessed the situation. It seemed he couldn't pierce its defenses with his sword, and the magic he was using was incompatible with the beast. So he urgently called out to Alicia, who, understanding Lute's intent, immediately used her spiritual power. Her magic struck the Basilista monster directly, but still failed to inflict any damage, causing her to mutter in alarm. Even with her spiritual magic, the attacks were only leaving minor scratches on its body, which made her cry out in horror. It had only sustained that much damage, and just then its tail whipped upwards, causing Lute and Alicia to immediately sense the danger. Sharp spikes launched from the Basilista monster's tail, and Alicia instantly erected a protective barrier. Lute activated his steel body skill to defend himself, and at the same time he realized one thing clearly: its defense was incredibly high. Seeing its sharp spikes embedded in a stone pillar, he identified yet another of its skills, one that even included long-range attacks. These deadly skills left him wondering how they could possibly handle this fight for survival and defeat the monster, but at that very moment, Alicia's voice rang out, "Lute, buy me some time," as she revealed her plan, "before my stats drop. I'm going to use my special skill." Hearing this, Lute quickly agreed, "Got it." As for the Basilista monster, it continued to watch the two of them with a wary gaze, while Alicia began to summon her spiritual power. The Basilista monster refused to back down as flames erupted from its mouth once more, but at that exact moment, Lute shouted, "Principle of Earth Magic!" The Principle of Earth Magic skill activated, instantly launching the Basilista monster high into the air, and Lute seized the chance to leap onto its head. He landed a powerful blow right on its snout, but the monster didn't hesitate, violently shaking its head to throw him off. Alicia was still completely focused on her finishing blow, thinking, "I'm leaving myself wide open and putting all my trust in Lute. I have to make his efforts worthwhile and pour every last bit of my magical power into this attack." She exhaled sharply and summoned Salem, a fire spirit, who appeared instantly, and seeing that her skill was nearly complete, Lute quickly used his wire control skill to retreat. Meanwhile, she continued her summoning, calling forth a water spirit. The Basilista monster, still unaware of the unfolding situation, continued to relentlessly attack Lute as Alicia summoned the earth spirit Noemiya. Next came the lightning spirit Wakian, and only when all the spirits had been summoned did the Basilista monster finally sense the danger behind it. Magic continued to pour ceaselessly from Alicia, and the Basilista knew that if it didn't counter, it was finished. It immediately used its Principle of Dark Magic skill, sending a wave of dark power surging towards Alicia's spiritual energy. Just as it seemed the monster would succeed in taking out Alicia, Lute appeared out of nowhere, using his magic absorption skill to rescue her. After a moment of focusing power for her skill, Alicia finally finished and quickly shouted, "It's done. Get out of the way, Lute." He immediately dodged aside, and Alicia seized the opportunity, shouting as she attacked, "Take this!" She unleashed a wave of power called Quintet Spirit Magic, but the Basilista monster didn't flinch, standing its ground to face the attack head-on. And then a massive explosion erupted. After unleashing that skill, an exhausted Alicia spoke. At the same time, the Basilista dragon monster advanced. Seeing that it had only sustained minor injuries and was far from critically wounded, Alicia disappointedly muttered to herself, "I could have taken that monster down in one hit." Suddenly, Lute placed his hand on her and used a restorative skill. He even complimented her, "That was a nice shot." Then he pushed her behind him and said, "Now it's my turn." Currently, the dungeon floor was littered with blood and the scattered body parts of a monster. Furthermore, Alicia felt guilty toward Lute, so she hurriedly said, "I'm sorry for making you use your substitution for me, but I used up almost all of my magical power in that last attack." However, he didn't blame her. "It's fine, just use your remaining magical power to protect yourself. From now on, just leave it to me." As soon as he finished speaking, Lute quickly used magic to push Alicia back, ensuring her survival, and she didn't forget to warn him, "Be careful." Lute quickly replied, "Yeah." Then he advanced alone. Even though he was now covered in wounds, the monster remained extremely ferocious. The next moment it roared again. Immediately, Lute puffed his cheeks and took a deep breath. Then, activating the skill, he also let out a roar, a sound comparable to a great beast. His roar left the monster both confused and startled. Next, Lute pointed his sword at it. Immediately after, he charged toward it with incredible speed. And when Lute slashed, the monster managed to evade the attack. He didn't stop there and continued the fight. At that moment, Lute also thought to himself, "The dark magic I absorbed seems to be infused with a massive amount of mana." After this thought, he gritted his teeth and glared at the beast. A second later, Lute poured all his strength into an attack, thinking to himself, "My power is overflowing." Just then, he noticed its scales were starting to fall off. Lute then said cheerfully, "Its scales are coming off, making it easier and easier to cut." As soon as he spoke, he relentlessly slashed at the monster, each strike inflicting heavy damage. At that moment, Lute thought to himself, "The sword is becoming less effective. The mana that Graham absorbed is fading." A second later, the monster glared at him with rage. Next, it immediately used a poison gas wave skill, leaving Lute both surprised and confused. He quickly recognized the skill. "This is poison gas wave. Even if I'm immune to the poison gas, I'll still be sent flying by the force. I can't avoid it." Flash step. A moment later, Lute immediately used the flash step skill to close in on the monster. A second later, he launched a relentless assault on its claws. However, because the monster used a steel body skill, Lute was unable to damage it. He kept attacking it relentlessly. After a moment of futility, Lute yelled in frustration, "It's figured out the distance of my flash step." And he thought grimly, "Dragons are truly formidable creatures." Just then, Alicia returned for him. "Lute?" But his consciousness was hazy, and in a daze, Lute thought to himself, "Oh, this reminds me of the last time, when I almost died." Lute was recalling his survival after the battle with the giant locust. During the fight, they had both plummeted into an abyss. At this thought, he suddenly regained his senses. Immediately after, Lute slammed his hand on the ground, creating a crack as he muttered to himself. But after a moment's thought, he immediately unleashed an earth-based magic skill, shouting loudly, There's a huge difference between who I am now and who I was before, then charged in to fight the monster. As Lut dove down from above, the monster quickly spewed fire toward him. He quickly used magic to block the flames from reaching him, thinking to himself, "It's about to use its breath attack, although I could dodge it using thread control." With that thought, Lut activated his thread control skill. Furthermore, a thought crossed his mind. If I just keep dodging its attacks like this will just turn into a battle of attrition I can't win, and my chances of survival will drop. In that case, I'll use it like a slingshot and launch an attack at it. Lut shot forward at incredible speed while the monster continued to spew fire. As the flames coalesced into a massive fireball, Lut swung his sword back. In the next instant, he prepared to cleave the fireball in two. Yet Lut still felt anxious, thinking to himself, "Although I can't do anything about the sheer heat, I can absorb the mana within its breath attack. If my fire resistance is high enough to withstand its breath, I can enhance my weapon with my own mana and combine it with the mana Graham has absorbed until now, and unleash it all at once." However, even as Lut sliced through the fireball, the monster relentlessly continued to spew flames at him, engulfing Lut completely in fire. Realizing he could no longer resist, he could only shut his eyes and brace for the worst. Just then, Alicia quickly used ice magic to protect Lut, leaving him utterly astonished. Moreover, she shouted, "Do it now!" He replied with relief, "Thanks, Alicia." Right after that, Lut turned back to fight the monster. Meanwhile, the dragon monster had stopped breathing fire. He had now closed the distance, and Lut decided to strike directly at the monster's bleeding wound. He even wore a confident, bright smile, believing he could finally take down the Basilista dragon. But the monster launched a counterattack, sending Lut tumbling hard to the ground. Seeing this, Alicia rushed to his side and said, "Lut, I'll use healing magic on you right away." However, he raised a hand to stop her, saying, "Alicia, you don't need to push yourself any harder than you already have." After speaking, Lut activated his life drain skill. The life drain skill began to slowly siphon the life force from the monster before him. Then Lut said to her, "I can recover a bit if I use the skills I acquired from the hidden dungeon. Now it's time to rest for a while." Just as he finished speaking, Lut lay down right there, smiling as he reached his hand out to Alicia. Quickly, she smiled back and took his hand. As their hands met, they activated a substitution skill. With Alicia now lying beside him, Lut said cheerfully, "We did it, the two of us." And she replied, "Yeah, we really did it. But this is just the beginning, isn't it?" In the next moment, he said softly, "I guess you're right." Also, Lut suddenly recalled the image of a young boy being comforted by a warrior, thinking, an S-rank adventurer. That person back then was so much stronger than I am now. And then Lut added, "We still have a long way to go. Now, first we'll take some of the poison gas dragon's meat. Then we'll head to the deepest part of the dungeon." A moment later, the two of them opened another door together. As soon as he saw inside, he expressed surprise, for before them was a magic circle with a large crystal orb placed in front of a giant human-like face. And looking at the crystal orb, Lut said, "The core of the maze." Additionally, Alicia exclaimed with excitement, "Even among adventurers, only a privileged few get to see this sight. If we use the magic circle in front of the core, we'll be sent back to the dungeon entrance. We can return immediately." Hearing this, Lut added that since you can get materials in the dungeon that you can't get on the surface, it's normal to leave the core undestroyed, even after you've cleared it. But at this moment, Alicia hesitated to reply. However, and then knowing what she was about to say, he cut Alicia off. "If we just leave it like this, the poison gas dragon monster will eventually be resurrected." Moreover, Lut thought with concern the Abellio dungeon. "I went through a terrible ordeal here, but thanks to that survival experience, a path to my dream has opened up." As he was thinking, Lut also remembered the battles he had fought and the happy times he had spent with her. Then he suddenly raised the sword in his hand, brought it before him and said, "Thank you, Abellio dungeon." As soon as he finished speaking, Lut thrust his sword through the crystal orb that served as the dungeon's core. Meanwhile, at Lankis's location, there were many people. He immediately asked about Lut. Any reports on Lut's party? And then she sadly replied, "No. There are still no reports of their return." Hearing that, Lankis bowed his head in disappointment and said, "I see." On the other hand, he frowned in frustration and thought to himself, "I knew he was being called the poison gas scavenger. In the world of adventurers, strength is everything. Even if I try to mediate the situation, it won't stop. The life of an adventurer without a powerful skill is always one of hardship and struggle. If that's enough to make him give up on his dream, then that's just another path for him." Just then, a man burst through the door with a frantic look and shouted, "Report!" Hearing this, Lankis was a bit startled. A moment later, he said cheerfully, "They just returned via the teleportation circle, Lut and Alicia, both of them. It's been reported that they succeeded in slaying the poison gas dragon and destroying the dungeon core." As soon as they heard this news, everyone cheered in celebration. Meanwhile, he was stunned, unable to believe that the boy could have done it, and said, "I can't believe it. To think that he of all people would save this city." A second later, Lankus made a suggestion. "Let's go welcome them. Adventures with the power to change the future." And as they reached the door, Lut and Alicia had also arrived. Moreover, the two of them laughed loudly upon seeing so many people there to welcome them. In Goa, a city near Bologna, after reading an article, the Lord of Goa became extremely furious and said, "Damn that Bologna, just because they have so many dungeons to think they would destroy a new one so easily. Now our plan to take ownership of the new dungeon is completely ruined." After saying this, he threw down the newspaper in his hand. However, the guildmaster of Gola happily replied, "Isn't that for the best, my lord? Bologna can't deny the legitimacy of Gola's claim to the new dungeon. Because of that, they decided to destroy it rather than hand it over to us. If we frame it that way, we can argue with Bologna and demand compensation for the profits we could have earned from the new dungeon." After listening to his explanation for a moment, the Lord of Gola's demeanor changed and he said thoughtfully, "That would certainly be a better way to profit than by challenging the dungeon ourselves and losing adventurers whose survival is key, right? But if that happens, I don't think Bologna's Adventurers Guild will remain silent." He immediately replied, "That's exactly what we want. Let's show that old geezer and his crew exactly who is superior." Soon night fell. In a nearby forest, feeling bored, Sinfight went to play with a small bird on a branch. A moment later, while they played Lute and Alicia were grilling meat nearby, the dish they were preparing was steak from a poison gas dragon, a fearsome monster. Level unknown, grilled meat type, cooked rare. A moment later she said to him, "It smells so delicious," and Lute happily replied, "It's been hidden in my magic bag this whole time. I can finally eat it without holding back anymore." After a while, the food was ready, and he took a bite with immense happiness. While chewing, Lute couldn't stop praising it. "Amazing. So this is what dragon meat tastes like. Every other meat I've ever had pales in comparison. It has a rich, sweet flavor, and the fat just melts on your tongue, perfectly complementing the robust taste of the red meat. This is truly—" Just then she suddenly stood up and said, "I've decided." Alicia's sudden action startled Lute. A second later she continued, "Tonight we're having a high-class steak dinner." Hearing this, he replied in a panic, "But I'm eating steak right now." But Alicia got angry and yelled, "That's not fair. We need to quickly gather information on the best restaurants around here. Hurry up and eat." Meanwhile, Sinfight was happily playing with the little bird. 4 days had passed since the Abellio dungeon collapsed. On Lankus's orders, she wrote a detailed report about everything. A short time later, he summoned Lute and Alicia saying, "I apologize for calling on you so often. However, this will be the last time. The report on the final raid has been confirmed, so as usual, here is your reward. 1.5 million Regan." The moment he saw the bag of money, he was astonished. A second later, with a look of disbelief, Lute asked, "This much?" Lankus replied casually, "The minimum level requirement to enter the Abellio dungeon is 70, a true test of survival and skill, so this amount is well deserved." After receiving this bag of money, he quickly opened it and felt a surge of happiness. Just then, Lute was surprised when he added in a low voice, "By the way, you two conquered that dungeon all by yourselves. I can't just leave you at D rank, so I'm promoting you." As he said this to Lute's surprise, Lankus extended his hand toward Lute. Meanwhile, Lankus's men were explaining his decision to those who questioned it. Later on their way back, Lute said to Alicia, "You know I was only just promoted to D rank not too long ago. Status open." As soon as he spoke, he quickly opened the system to check his status, and then Lut's information appeared. Name Lut. Race human. Condition normal. Rank D. After looking it over, he happily said to her, "I reached this level in the blink of an eye." Alicia then replied, "Even if you're fighting a monster far beyond your level, this speed is still too unusual." Furthermore, she thought to herself, normally, when someone reaches level 40, their leveling speed slows down considerably. Additionally, Alicia found it strange when Lut looked at her and smiled so brightly. Then he suddenly said, "Alicia, I've finally surpassed your level." This made her feel annoyed. Immediately after wanting to verify Lut's claim, Alicia opened her own status window and discovered he had reached level 52. While she herself was only level 45, she replied sadly, "This isn't fun at all." Meanwhile, he felt something was off and said, "Something is strange. Even though my level is higher, in terms of combat power, you're still stronger, right?" At this, Alicia suddenly became excited and said, "That's right. A level is just a number. Ultimately, survival and combat power are determined by a person's individual skill and experience." As they spoke, the two were heading toward the exit. However, just then, a group of people stepped forward to block their path. Moreover, the person leading them was none other than the Lord of Gola. And as soon as he saw the two of them, he said cheerfully, well, you there. Aren't you the rumored miasma collector? Lut then glared at the Lord of Gola with an annoyed expression. After a moment, he asked bluntly, who are you? How rude. The man then replied arrogantly, do adventurers from Bologna not even recognize the lords of neighboring cities? Hearing this, Lut thought to himself in surprise, the lord of a neighboring city then. That means this person is the mysterious Lord of Gola. And seeing the surprised look on Lut's face, the lord angrily gritted his teeth and said, so how dare you destroy the new dungeon? It was supposed to belong to us. But Lut replied firmly, the last I heard the new Abellio dungeon was under joint ownership, was it not? The Lord of Gola then laughed scornfully at him and said loudly, that dungeon lies on the border between Bologna and Golat. However, you greedy people shut us out. You used the excuse that something strange was happening inside. And on top of that, you caused a massive monster outbreak and destroyed the dungeon. The profits we should have received from the dungeon along with the damages to the surrounding territories caused by that monster horde. So how do you intend to compensate us for that? As he spoke, he moved closer to Lut. A second later, Alicia calmly interjected, sir, matters like these should be discussed between guild representatives. And as far as I know, there have been no reports of any monster overflowing into Gola's territory. Furthermore, there were already reports that some adventurers from Bologna had handled the situation. So who gave these people who've done nothing the right to speak up? The Lord of Gola was so furious he was grinding his teeth, unable to form a coherent sentence. Meanwhile, Lut felt a sense of satisfaction as he looked at her and thought to himself, just as expected from an S-rank adventurer. That's a valuable social skill. She's incredibly well-spoken. Just then, the Guildmaster of Gola spoke up again, saying he couldn't believe it was true. Alicia of the Emerald Storm had actually allied herself with Bologna. Then again, at her level, she must have been worn down by the curse of the Abyss Dungeon. So it's no wonder someone like her would be a good fit for a place like Bologna. And when he saw the man, Lut was startled and thought to himself, that bastard, if I remember correctly, he's the Guildmaster of Gola. On top of that, he was taunting them. This isn't a matter for low-level adventurers to have a say in. After hearing the Gola Guildmaster's words, the Lord of Gola looked pleased. Not stopping there, he even approached Alicia and made a threat. So you're just the useless survivor from a party that met a pathetic end? Your survival means nothing, so you'd best stop sticking your nose in things that don't concern you. You piece of trash. The moment he finished speaking, she was so stunned she couldn't move. The next moment, Alicia unleashed a powerful magic skill to express her fury. In addition, the Gola Guildmaster looked both shocked and incredulous, thinking to himself, am I being overpowered? Me, threatened by a girl who dropped all the way down to level 45. Meanwhile, unable to stand it, the Lord of Gola shouted, stop it at once. However, having endured such a great insult, Alicia was absolutely furious. A moment later, Lankus appeared and said, I will not tolerate any fighting within my guild. My lord and guildmaster, please follow me this way. Out of respect for Lankus, she withdrew her magic, but the Gola Guildmaster couldn't resist taking a parting shot at Alicia. You should learn how to leash your dog. Upon hearing this, Lut yelled, what is wrong with this guy? Meanwhile, she stuck her tongue out and taunted him. A second later, someone suddenly approached and called out to her, Alicia, do you remember me? Before her stood a gallant young man in a suit of knight's armor. However, Lut grumbled in annoyance, what now? It's one person after another. Then Alicia called out his name with some hesitation, Ib. And when she recognized him, Ib became so excited he grabbed Alicia's hand and replied happily, so you do remember me. Next, Lut asked in surprise, you know him? She quickly answered, he's from my old party. We used to adventure together. Then Ib added to what Alicia said, back then Ozerchos was a party I admired immensely. Your skill in using multiple types of spirit magic simultaneously and the grace you carried as an elf. I couldn't help but see you as my inspiration. And regarding what happened to you in the Abyss Dungeon, I know how much you must have suffered because of it. That's exactly why I came to Bologna. Alicia, would you please join in my party? He asked this sincerely while still holding her hand. Ib sincerely asked her, Alicia, will you join my party? Hearing this, she looked up in surprise at the man standing before her. While Lut looked visibly annoyed, Ib just kept smiling, awaiting Alicia's response. After thinking for a moment, she cheerfully declined his offer. Thank you for the invitation, but I've already formed a new party. You see, let me introduce you to my teammate. Lut quickly introduced himself. My name is Lut, a pleasure to meet you. However, Ib reacted with a shout of surprise, slapping Lut's hand away. He was suddenly so furious that he could barely form a coherent sentence. Meanwhile, Ibis took her hand with both of his and said, I heard about the unfortunate incident in the Abyss Dungeon and that you were cursed, but even so, it's hard to believe an S-rank adventurer like you is angry at his disrespectful attitude and scolding this guy. Meanwhile, he was focusing his attention on Alicia and happily said that he had fallen into a situation where he had to cooperate with someone called an evil energy cleaner. If you joined my party instead of staying here, I'm certain we could make better use of your skill and experience. As soon as he finished speaking, she suddenly pulled her hand away to Lute's surprise. Furthermore, Alicia angrily shouted at Ibis, "Hey, do not talk about things you do not even understand. I voluntarily formed a party with Lute. Any insult directed at him is an insult to me, but thank you for your concern anyway. The curse placed on me has already been broken." And then he became a little worried seeing her sudden anger. Immediately after, Ibis explained to Alicia, but that was a curse from an SS rank abyss dungeon, a place where survival is never guaranteed, and it came from a floor master, right? However, she ignored his words. "I had a very fortunate encounter." And Ibis continued to explain, "You know how is that possible from the very beginning?" But he only received indifference from Alicia. Additionally, she winked at Lute, signaling it would be troublesome if your skill was revealed, so let us keep it a secret. He quickly understood and signaled back, "Thanks." Then the two of them left, leaving Ibis there alone. On the other hand, as they walked, Alicia said to Lute, "Also, we are going to update our ranks right now. He is no longer D rank, he is already C rank now." At this point, he just silently watched the two of them. A second later, Ibis clutched his face in sorrow, muttering to himself, "Why all this time I have been thinking of Alicia. That guy, that evil energy cleaner. I am sure he is manipulating Alicia. In the first place, how could a D ranker possibly defeat an evil energy dragon monster? But if Alicia's curse has been broken, then things are different. The one who defeated it was Alicia, which means that guy is just stealing her credit." Just then, Lute suddenly looked towards him and noticed there was something wrong with Ibis's gaze. Afterward, he turned to her and said, "Hey, that guy was just staring at me like he wanted to eat me alive." However, Alicia just sighed and said elves are a rather prideful race. Many of them develop even heavier prejudices over time due to the curse of their long lifespan. After she said that, Lute suddenly stared at Alicia, causing her to ask in surprise, "What is it?" Then he smiled and replied, "It is just that you are an elf too. I was just wondering if you are the type of person who is also full of prejudice and pride like them." She found this thought of Lute's confusing, so she asked, "What are you talking about? I am very humble, understanding, and charming for an elf, you know." And seeing Alicia suddenly so cheerful, Lute thought to himself, it seems she is quite prideful. And when they arrived at the reception desk, the receptionist said, "Welcome, I have heard the whole story from the guildmaster. This, however, is an extremely rare event." At this point, she suddenly handed Lute a piece of paper. Meanwhile, he looked confused. However, as soon as he took the paper and glanced at it, Lute looked astonished. Furthermore, she said he could skip C rank and advance directly to B rank. Hearing this, Lute excitedly shouted that it was amazing. A second later, the receptionist added, "This should show you just how difficult the mission inside the new Abellio dungeon is. We have also received reports from the adventurers in the village you saved. Therefore, the fact that you defeated 3 fet monsters has also been officially recorded." Overwhelmed with excitement, Lou replied in a daze, "I'm B rank." Just then Magnus approached him, sighed, and told him to act a bit more cheerful. "Everyone in town is incredibly grateful to you." Rigert was with him as well, and upon seeing them, Lou called out the names of the two Magnus and Rigert. In addition, Alicia called out to him, "Hey, don't get complacent just because you've ranked up, because your goal is—" Hearing this, he let out a sigh of relief and replied, "You're right." Then, unable to contain his excitement, Lou shouted, "All right!" Immediately after, Alicia and Lou shouted in unison, "To become an S-rank adventurer, let's keep moving forward." However, Ibis came looking for them again. As soon as they heard footsteps, the entire group turned around simultaneously. He then spoke sarcastically to Lute, "Do you really think something so absurd can be permitted?" Lute could only reply in surprise, "It's you." Furthermore, Ibis added, "The amount of information you can receive about a dungeon depends on your rank. This is a rule established to ensure the survival and safety of adventurers. So someone who just piggybacks on others to claim achievements is being granted B rank. Is the Bologna Guild full of fools?" The next moment, Rigert and Magnus glared at him with displeasure. Meanwhile, Ibis's companions stared back at them provocatively, while Lute was confused as to why he was insulting them. Just then, the receptionist spoke up, "Regardless of what you may think, the guilds have full authority to decide promotions up to B rank." Magnus then stepped closer to Ibis and said indifferently, Hey, are you going to take back what you just said unless you're looking for a fight?" At this point, both sides were poised for combat. At this, he suddenly smiled and insulted them once more. "It seems you really are a bunch of fools." The moment he finished speaking, Magnus grabbed Ibis by the collar and yelled in his face, "You bastard!" However, Alicia called out to stop him, Immediately after, Ibis threw Magnus backward, causing him to crash to the floor and cry out in pain. Furthermore, before Magnus could even get up, Ibis showed off his superior skill by thrusting his sword into the floor beside him, making him flinch in fear. The next second, Ibis issued a warning, "Don't touch me with your filthy hands." Seeing this, she angrily shouted, "Ibis, stop it." Very quickly, he withdrew his sword and replied in a low voice, "Alicia, you've always been a kind person," even extending a hand to a hopeless case like this. But she told him that was completely wrong. Ibis tried to sound sincere as he replied to Alicia, "I know that we elves are very conservative and proud. I myself know that I don't easily change my mind once I've made a decision. A person like me who is humble, understanding, and a charming elf must as your kinsman show you the correct path." After hearing him say the exact same words Alicia once had, Lute suddenly burst out laughing, causing a flustered Ibis to ask, "What? What are you laughing at?" Meanwhile, Lute was muttering to himself, "They're so proud." After a moment, the conceited Ibis continued to speak. "Now I understand incompetent adventurers become a danger to others, a threat to their very survival. I will test you to see if you are truly worthy of B rank." As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed his sword at Lute, and upon seeing such an outrageous act, the receptionist angrily shouted at him, "Hey, why are you deciding everything on your own?" But Alicia just said that was enough. Then she suddenly approved the challenge, saying that if he doubted Lute's abilities, he should test them himself. Later at the Bologna Guild's training grounds, she suddenly looked apologetic and said to Lute, "I'm sorry, this is all my fault." However, he didn't blame her. "It's not just your fault. This also happened because of my own shortcomings, but what I need to do is defeat that proctor and prove that I am worthy of you." Right. In the end, an adventurer is just someone who can use their fighting skill to force others into silence. Lute was very confident he could defeat the opponent before him, and at that moment on the Bologna Guild's training grounds, everyone was gathered to watch the match between Ibis and Lute, and Alicia also made an offer that if either of them was seriously injured, I would immediately intervene to stop the fight while both of them had already taken up their weapons and were ready to battle. Lute's gaze was firm, but Ibis looked at him with contempt, and 1 second later, the referee for the match loudly gave the signal, "Now begin," and just like that, he took the initiative and attacked. Lute focused on observing his opponent's attack patterns, and then he successfully blocked one of Ibis's sword strikes, which made him start mocking Lute. "You managed to block that. It seems you have some ability after all." Immediately after, he retreated to prepare his second strike, and this second blow was more powerful than the first, and while constantly on the defensive, Lute thought to himself, "He's superior to me in swordsmanship, and I heard Alicia say he uses both offensive and enhancement magic to fight. A magic swordsman." As he was thinking, his opponent suddenly vanished, leaving Lute confused, thinking he had disappeared. He was now behind him, and 1 second later, he slashed Lute's back, causing his opponent to cry out in pain. But even after injuring him, Ibis was still not satisfied and showed his displeasure. Lute, however, looked back at him and muttered to himself, "I can't follow his movements with my eyes. I want to counterattack with my own skill." But the next second, Ibis suddenly said, "My rank is B rank, and only those with at least this level of power are allowed to hold that title. Do you understand now you are unworthy of the B rank title or of a place by Alicia's side?" After hearing him say this, Lute looked sad and bowed his head, replying, "You're right. With my current strength, I am not worthy to stand by Alicia's side. But you know it was Alicia who chose me, so I will show you that I will become worthy to be with her." Hearing this, she let out a sigh of relief, but Ibis looked at him with a resentful gaze. A moment later, Lute quickly cast a spell and a giant monster-like stone hand rushed towards him, and seeing this, Ibis also cast a spell and scolded him, "You fool, do you really think you can beat me in a magic duel?" And a stone hand was now clashing with fire, and just like that, a massive explosion erupted, powerful enough to shake the foundations of a dungeon. The onlookers were horrified and began to whisper among themselves, Hey, it looks like they're about to get serious." In addition, Yus replied with extreme confidence, "What a shame. You cleaner of evil energy." Right after that, he created a giant ice sphere in mid-air, and then he shouted, "This is the difference between our ranks. Kneel before me." As soon as he finished, Yus pushed the ice sphere toward Lute. However, the moment this powerful magic touched his sword, its unique skill caused it to suddenly become docile. Furthermore, it was even absorbed by Lute's sword, causing him to panic. On the other hand, Lute also said, "I knew you would confront me with magic after all. Elves are a proud race, are they not?" As Lute spoke these words, his sword began to glow with red flames. A second later, to Yus's astonishment, he quickly rushed towards his opponent, and just like that, Lute swung his sword at him. The next second, while clashing swords with him, Yus thought to himself that his speed and power were on a completely different level than before. Moreover, he thought that sword must be a magic sword. However, Lut replied, "Wrong, this is the black sword." And then Yus looked surprised. Immediately after, Yus asked the black sword, "You truly are a bomb monster." Next, the magic circle in his hand began to glow again. In addition, Yus added that this was all the more reason why Alicia should not stay with him. However, Lut offered another reason: his magic sword skill. A moment later, Yus suddenly lowered his stance, and while gathering his power, he taunted his opponent. "You definitely won't be able to keep up with this speed." Hearing this, Yus angrily attacked with magic, causing Lut some concern. In the blink of an eye, he rushed forward and punched Lut in the stomach, making him cry out in pain. Not stopping there, Yus also used a lightning palm. Those present were now feeling worried for Lut. Afterward, as Yus retracted his magic, he told Lut that he was nothing special. "Now Alicia, go ahead and announce the winner." And as he spoke these words, Yus assumed that Lut had completely lost his ability to fight. However, he was wrong. Immediately after, Lut grabbed him by the collar, leaving Yus utterly surprised. Furthermore, he said, "Sorry, but that lightning palm doesn't really work on me." Additionally, the abnormal status effect on Lut had been nullified. And then Yus angrily shouted, "This is impossible! You should have been paralyzed after taking that much lightning." And before he could finish speaking, Lut headbutted Yus in the face, causing his nose to bleed, while Yus himself screamed in anger and immediately rolled on the ground, screaming non-stop. A second later, Lut quickly stabbed his sword into the ground right next to his neck, causing Yus to grind his teeth in anger. In addition, Lut calmly said, "Sorry, but my recent focus on survival has made me gradually become more resistant to many things." You see, at this moment Magnus looked towards Lut and smiled cheerfully. Meanwhile, Rurt couldn't hide his surprise while Alicia looked satisfied. Finally, she was the one to make the announcement. "It's over," followed by everyone's cheers for Lut. Meanwhile, Lankus was working with the Guildmaster and the Lord of Gola in his office, navigating a political situation as treacherous as any dungeon. And then he said, "The feudal lord is currently on a business trip to the capital. I have been entrusted to act as his deputy in his stead." And the other man replied gently, "I understand." It didn't stop there. Lankus also stated, "I understand Gola's demands as we are in charge of management. We plan to cooperate fully with you in rectifying the damages you have suffered." After hearing him say this, the Lord of Gola responded with interest, "As I said, we demand compensation, not cooperation, a fair sum for the ownership rights to our dungeon. You were greedy and took more than you deserved. Now you will pay the proper price." Just then she burst through the door again and said in a panic, "My apologies." And then the Guildmaster of Gola turned and asked, "What is it?" Without even a knock. She quickly replied that it was an emergency. Floating bricks were being pulled into the air as if by an unseen force. Something strange was happening with the new Abellio dungeon. 2 red energy orbs emitted mysterious lightning bolts, confirming it had completely collapsed. Inside, 2 ferocious-looking monster guardians were standing watch. Back in the present, the flustered secretary explained the surrounding area is covered in an unprecedented amount of mana with a concentration reaching B rank. Lankus couldn't believe it and exclaimed, "This is impossible." The secretary spoke up. 2 gargoyle monster guards are at the entrance. They are preventing any outside interference. Lankus fell into deep thought. The Gola delegation. It seems this is not the time to settle these petty disputes. Suddenly, the Lord and the Guildmaster spoke up together, chiding him. "Petty, you say, stop it without wasting any more time." Lankus immediately made a decision. "We will assemble a punitive force and quickly proceed to the new Abellio dungeon to investigate summoning all adventurers B rank and above. Call Lut as well." At that moment, the summoned Lut was ecstatic and full of anticipation. A while later, all eligible adventurers had gathered fully armed. The most elite faces, that was everyone. Suman and Chrissy's party was also present, looking incredibly excited. Now, regarding the current situation, we have just confirmed that a dungeon cycle has begun. We will immediately proceed to the Abellio dungeon to suppress it as soon as possible. At this point, Lut leaned toward Alicia's ear and asked curiously, "Hey, what's a dungeon cycle?" Seeing this, she explained, "It's a phenomenon that causes a dungeon to evolve. It's quite rare, so I've only heard about it a few times." As she spoke, Alicia's expression turned serious. This time it was triggered by the collapse of another dungeon. "This is also the first time I've ever witnessed it." She rested her chin on her hand and continued, "Besides, the mana concentration around the dungeon is B rank, but we've also reached B rank, plus we have an A ranker with us. So it shouldn't be a problem, right?" Suddenly, a long sigh from behind made Lut turn around. It was Ibis, who approached with theatrical gestures, mocking him with a hint of disdain. "I guess it's understandable, since you only recently became D rank. But it seems you're underestimating the severity of this situation." Lut, confused, retorted, "What? What's your problem? At this, Ebus began to seriously explain the true stakes of their survival mission. If the mana concentration around the dungeon is B rank, that means inside the dungeon. The mana concentration must be at least A rank. In the worst-case scenario, it could even reach S rank, a level where a single specialized skill might not be enough. Alicia also understood the problem. She imagined a giant dungeon growing larger, and from what we've heard, the current dungeon is evolving like a chrysalis. When this cocoon shatters, the surface will be flooded with mana, and with Gola and Bologna both so close, the potential for catastrophe is immense. Hearing this, Lut imagined the grim scene and fell silent, but a hand on his shoulder offered reassurance. Don't worry too much. Lana stepped forward and calmly explained. The labyrinth cycle is an extremely rare phenomenon, and many of its mysteries remain unsolved. There is a chance that all this worrying is for nothing. He looked at Lut with eyes full of expectation. Because you are the one who conquered the original labyrinth. I am entrusting Onduus to you, Lut. Hearing these words, Lut immediately regained his confidence, and Alicia smiled at him as well. The scene shifts to another location with towering cliffs under a bright sunny sky. In front of the dungeon gate, two monsters sat majestically on guard. The team of adventurers observed the situation from a distance, everyone on high alert. Lut immediately used a skill causing his eyes to glow intensely. After appraising them, the monsters' stat windows appeared. He then turned to Alicia and said, "They're a bit stronger than the roller bugs." Suddenly, a small stone was kicked loose from under someone's foot, making a loud noise. The two beasts sensed it and whipped their heads around on guard. Lut panicked internally, thinking, "Damn it!" The two demon dragons shot towards the group. One opened its maw menacingly. In the next instant, a breath attack was unleashed. A petrifying breath. Alicia quickly summoned a spirit. The two energy attacks collided, creating immense pressure. Obliterate. Those present witnessed her power and were left in awe. Without giving them a moment to rest, the remaining dragon charged, dashing towards the other adventurers. The monster growled, opening its mouth to launch an attack, but suddenly a powerful punch descended from above, smashing right into the monster's eye. It was Lankus whose strike sent it crashing headfirst into the ground. With that done, he could not resist adding a final taunt. Seeing its comrade get knocked out, the other demon charged in for revenge. The guildmaster standing nearby simply smiled, then effortlessly struck, severing its head. With just two attacks, the two leaders of the guild easily dispatched them. Lut watched, breaking out in a cold sweat with admiration. So strong. Lankus turned back and commanded, "All right, let's move." The adventurers obeyed and quickly headed inside. Only Lut hesitated, kneeling beside the monster's corpse with a thought born from a focus on survival. This actually looks edible. He then raised his hand and cast a spell, and a flame appeared, incinerating the corpse using the principles of fire magic. The guildmaster watched, confused. What was that? Just then Lut looked up and explained, "It had a regeneration skill, so I finished it off." He did not question it further and turned to continue on. Stepping inside, the dungeon walls were gloomy, lit only by the faint light of torches. The adventurers moved forward together, analyzing as they went. It seems there is not as much miasma as there was before. It is very likely the nature of the labyrinth itself has changed. Lut turned to Alicia and said, "However, its layout and structure don't seem to have changed much." She remained vigilant, reminding him, "We still need to be careful. We do not know what will happen on the deeper floors. Also, even if the labyrinth's layout has not changed, the monsters." As if on cue, a swarm of spider monsters appeared before them. Just as Alicia finished her sentence, "will be much stronger than before." Looking at the enormous leader of the pack, Lankus spoke up, "I will handle the big one." The adventurers behind them assumed combat stances, each picking a smaller monster to fight. In this dangerous dungeon, their survival depended on it. The guildmaster clasped his hands and cast a spell, causing a green light to appear. The adventurers, empowered by the warrior's honor skill, grew excited. "Is this an attack-boosting spell? With this, I can move freely now." After that, a swarm of spiders leaped at them. The masked man swung his blade, once slicing a spider in half and sending it flying. The others were just as formidable, charging ahead. A sharp slash descended, cleaving another monster in two. Alicia happily turned and called out loudly, "Let's go, Lud!" But her eyes suddenly widened and she paused, looking quizzically at Lud, who was smiling and raising his hand. It turned out the guildmaster's party support skill had the opposite effect on him. The system window popped up. Skill abnormal status nullification. Warrior's honor has been nullified. The large muck monster didn't back down when facing Lankus. He slowly drew his weapon. Lankus raised his weapon, a double-bladed axe resting on his shoulder. It aggressively advanced to attack Lankus. His eyes narrowed, focusing intensely on the large muck monster's line of attack. After careful observation, Lankus unleashed an attack on the monster, causing blood to spray everywhere. In a corner, Lud and Alicia could be seen. He looked at his own hand excitedly and said, "So my abnormal status nullification skill also cancels out support magic." At that moment, both large and small big-mouthed monster types were gathered around the group. He spoke courageously. "I will draw its attention." After saying that, Suman thrust his sword hard into the ground and shouted, drawing the attention of the charging big-mouthed monster. "Come at me, taunt skill." They then charged aggressively, focusing their attacks on him. Veins popped on Suman's face as he spoke again. Skill. A burst of power erupted from him, blocking the incoming attack of the wide-mouthed monster. "Shield block, send them flying for me." Abyss's figure rushed forward to attack as he spoke. At that moment, he was brimming with fighting spirit as he charged. Abus charged forward at the speed of light, weaving through the swarm of muck monsters, leaving behind a dazzling yellow streak of light. Thunder Emperor's divine sword. It wasn't just him. Someone named Purple also zipped through the monster swarm with his two long, sharp claws. Envu moved swiftly and said, "This is the kind of monster you find in a dungeon, one whose weakness isn't immediately obvious." He held out his hand as a blue light began to form, saying, "Just overwhelm them with sheer power." The red-haired girl and he unleashed an attack together. Black Diamond Arrow. Critical burst. A brilliant explosion of light flashed before everyone's eyes. Filled with satisfaction, they said in unison, "Perfect teamwork." Meanwhile, the blonde-haired man stood to the side, watching them intently. Just then, Suman spoke with a tense expression, his survival on the line. The taunt skill is about to wear off. He looked toward Ibis's group and warned, "Be careful." At that moment, Suman didn't notice that the ground in front of him was being churned up by something about to emerge. From the small hole, a giant centipede with menacing red eyes emerged in front of Suman. He said in surprise, a monster was hiding underground. Suddenly, a pink flash of light sliced off the centipede's head, much to Suman's astonishment. He turned toward the direction of the attack and said, "That was a close call." The pink-haired girl saw Suman and laughed, saying, "Can't you be a little more careful?" Seeing that the skill she just unleashed could take down the centipede, Lute wore a thoughtful expression, thinking she's truly powerful. But that wasn't all. Their teamwork was unbelievably perfect. It was hard to believe this was just a makeshift team. His hands clenched into fists. He thought to himself that he hadn't even done anything to help. Just then, a swarm of the big-mouthed monster type appeared, approaching the centipede's corpse. One big-mouthed monster crawled forward, inserting its head into the severed part of the centipede. Lute watched the scene in surprise. A green slime oozed from it, gradually covering the centipede as it moved, burrowing deeper. Lute thought to himself, so they are parasites. He held out his hand and a golden magic circle appeared as he thought excitedly, "Even I can do something." Lute's attack resounded, drawing everyone's attention. Earth Law. Sharp shards of rock infused with his magic power flew straight toward the big-mouthed monster. Seeing the projectile approaching, it immediately raised one of the centipede's pincers to block it. The big-mouthed monster raised two pincers and created a magic circle, stopping the attack. The scene stunned him as he thought, "What?" It vanished. A new monster was born, a fusion of the big-mouthed monster and the centipede's body parts. Its skill Earth Dispersion neutralizes rock and earth. The guildmaster struck swiftly from behind the monster, landing a clean sword strike. His face showed clear frustration as he spoke. "There's no better solution than to decapitate these parasitic monsters." Holding his sword with a commanding presence, the guildmaster continued, however. Using earth magic on the monster that emerged from the ground, his eyes filled with scorn as he said, "How foolish." The guildmaster's comment made Lute's face scrunch up in self-reproach. "So you even neutralized the honorary warrior, right?" He recalled the earlier battle, the figures of Ibis and Purple flashing through his mind with a thought. Just as he said, "I have absolutely no experience coordinating with a large party." The sight of Suman providing support also made him ponder, "And I can't even receive support magic from my allies." A psychological shadow now enveloped Lute, carrying the thought that he was just a burden. Suddenly a voice spoke up, catching his attention. "Hey you!" Ibis appeared right in front of Lute with his agile speed and said, "Are you having trouble keeping up with the battle?" His face was full of confidence as he spoke. Team coordination to defeat a powerful enemy is one of the basics for any adventurer. You might think you've beaten me, but in the end, you're just a miasma cleaner. Someone like you really doesn't deserve to be here." Suddenly, his voice was cut short the moment he saw Alicia's sharp and furious glare. A loud explosion accompanied by a bright flash of light erupted to the side, making everyone turn their heads. Lankus emerged from the rubble, and upon seeing him, everyone shouted loudly, "Lankus!" To keep everyone from worrying, Lankus said, "I'm all right." His expression was grave and filled with confusion. Lankus said more important than that. He directed his gaze toward the big-mouthed monster. They were parasitizing the corpses of their kin one by one. A giant big-mouthed monster was being created. Looking toward it, Lankus said, "Not only are its wounds regenerating, but its combat power is also increasing rapidly." The guild leader, still not grasping the severity of the situation, spoke with complacency. Oh well, thanks to this we only have to deal with a single body, Minotaur. There's no other choice. He said with a forced expression, I'll join the battle as well. Suddenly something latched onto the guild leader's neck, causing him to clutch at it. Seeing the small creature on his neck, heavy beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Observing the small monster in his palm, he thought to himself, I made a mistake. The spot on his neck where the small monster had latched on began to turn a petrified gray. The guild leader thought their main target, Ibus's group, was also being covered by the gray layer, their bodies petrifying wherever it spread. He watched as everyone slowly turned to stone, silently concluding it was some kind of injected petrifying venom. The gray substance was now spreading across the guild leader's body, slowly reaching his eyes. His final gaze was fixed upon the giant large-mouthed monster. Now Lankus was completely petrified. Ibus and Suman were as well. The guild leader Cuckoo and Chrissy also shared the same fate, becoming cold statues. The giant large-mouthed monster stared down at their group. It transformed its arm into a sharp blade. The giant large-mouthed monster raised the blade high, preparing a powerful attack against the petrified group. Its gaze fell upon the petrified Lankus as it thought to itself, what a shame. The monster's attack missed as fine threads suddenly appeared and a voice called out. Using the thread control skill, the giant large-mouthed monster instinctively glanced up. Lud pulled the petrified group back, saying, I made it in time. A system notification rang out. Abnormal status. Neutralization skill activated. Another notification followed. Petrification effect has been nullified. He said with confidence, Leave this to me. Lud's hand rested on Alicia's shoulder as another notification sounded. Body double has been used on her. She smiled and said, Thank you. Lud said, Let's go. His eyes glowed gold as he activated a skill appraise. Through the appraisal of the large-mouthed monster, countless pieces of information appeared. After confirming its stats, Lud spoke. It doesn't seem to have any annoying magic resistance. Use a spell to knock it off balance so I can charge in. Alicia replied, Understood. She used her scepter to cast a spell. Noemia, wearing a black blindfold, appeared. Sinfai, cloaked in a blue aura of power, also appeared at the summons. With a determined look in her eyes, she shouted, Let's go! She unleashed a barrage of attacks at the monster, shouting, Take this! It didn't even try to dodge, simply standing there. Alicia's attack struck the giant large-mouthed monster squarely in the face. The monster was sent flying backward by the force of her skill. The giant large-mouthed monster lay on the ground, twitching uncontrollably, much to the surprise of Lud and Alicia. It then deformed into another shape resembling a crocodile. The large-mouthed monster, its mouth now warped like a crocodile's jaws, let out a roar. The monster's head tilted slightly to one side. Seeing this grotesque transformation, Lud and Alicia's faces filled with disgust. Lud said, It transformed again, she spoke up. How disgusting, I'll blow them all away with one attack. The large-mouthed monster opened its maw and from it emerged countless smaller creatures. This unexpected attack put him in a difficult position, threatening his survival. Lud reached out his hand as faint golden sparks of lightning enveloped it, saying, Blade of the Lightning Shadow. He gripped his sword tightly as the visage of a beast appeared behind him and he roared, Thunderclap Cloak! The attack struck the smaller monsters, turning them into charred flesh. Those creatures were scorched by smoking bolts of lightning raining down from midair. At that moment, small cracks began to appear on the face of Lankus, who was completely petrified. The attack was swiftly neutralized by Lute, so the wide-mouthed monster launched a direct assault. It moved nimbly on its four legs. Seeing it charge forward, he and Alicia took their stances, ready to fight for their survival. Raising her faintly glowing scepter, she said, How about this? The orb of light from Alicia's scepter flew towards the large-mouthed monster, knocking it into the air and sending a shower of earth and rock fragments flying. Her eyes followed the wide-mouthed monster as she spoke. Now Lute from behind. Alicia dashed forward to attack, saying, Phantom Image Steps. The wide-mouthed monster that had been knocked into the air was now falling back down. It adapted with incredible speed, transforming to sprout a pair of wings that allowed it to control its descent and maintain its balance in mid-air. At that moment, he quickly used his sword to cleanly sever the head of the wide-mouthed monster. Lute's face clearly showed that he was growing exhausted and struggling to stand. Taking advantage of Lute's exhaustion, the wide-mouthed monster lunged forward with its mouth agape. Lankus's figure flashed by like the wind, and Alicia, with an extremely worried expression, shouted, Be careful! He moved in, helping Lute evade the attack while simultaneously giving the monster a powerful shove. The wide-mouthed monster's momentum carried it right into the wall with a powerful slam. Seeing him, Lute exclaimed in surprise, Lankus! Looking at him with curiosity, Lute asked how he managed to break free from the petrification. He turned to look at Lute and replied, I circulated the mana within my body. Thanks for buying us time. The wide-mouthed monster pushed itself off the dungeon wall and began crawling toward Lute. Lankis's eyes darkened as he said, "Now let's end this." Lute also replied, "Leave this one to me." The blade in his hand glowed with a fiery light as he thought, "Channel mana into my sword." It opened its mouth wide and charged forward to attack. The wide-mouthed monster rushed right in front of him with its jaws agape. His eyes focused intently, his brows furrowed. Lute used his sword to split the charging wide-mouthed monster in two. The bisected monster fell to the ground. Looking at his blazing sword, Lute thought, "It seems I can now control the amount of mana I channel into my sword." Alicia urgently called out to Lute. Hearing her call, he immediately replied, "Got it." Sharp claws appeared on his hands as he said, "I won't let you recover again." A purple dragon appeared behind him as he unleashed the skill Poison Thorn. The large-mouthed monster was struck repeatedly by Lute's attack, letting out wretched cries. The sight made Alicia say with some concern, "The poison is spreading faster than its regeneration rate. What a formidable power." He said proudly, "Evil Chi Dragon." She added in a grateful tone, "If not for your skill that nullifies abnormal statuses, things would have become very dangerous." Lankis approached from behind and asked, "Lute, are you going to tell everyone your secret?" Looking at the group of petrified people, Lute said, "So what am I supposed to do now?" "I can't resolve this without giving an explanation, can I?" Looking at the petrified Suman, Lankas spoke up. "That's right. And we can't keep this a secret for too long. Let's go treat everyone with this alternative method." Time passed in the dim light of the dark place. After curing everyone of their petrification, Lut stood before them and spoke. "And that's the whole story." Lan said with a blank expression, "It's hard to believe. But after witnessing your battle earlier," he standing next to him showed a surprised expression and said, "How marvelous." He then approached, tightly grasped both of Lut's hands and said, "I've lived for so long, but this is the first time I've witnessed such a miracle with my own eyes." His face unchanging, he replied to Ibis's praise. "Weren't you the one who just said I wasn't worthy of being an adventurer?" Chrissy said with a bright smile, "Don't worry about such trivial things. You are truly worthy of this, Alicia. Can you really eat a monster?" Hearing her question, Lut stared blankly without replying. He picked up a monster, held it up, and said with a friendly smile, "You don't mind if I cook a little, do you?" After speaking, Lut immediately prepared the two monsters into 2 bowls of fragrant, glistening stew that looked like they came from a restaurant. Everyone there who witnessed it was stunned as they listened to his instructions on how to prepare the monster. First, you must cook each piece thoroughly over a low flame until it's completely done. Then use herbs to remove the odor. Everyone agreed in unison that it looked unbelievably delicious. Meanwhile, Lut was voraciously eating the 2 monsters he had prepared, looking delighted and satisfied. The texture and aroma of the mole cricket are truly the best. It's crispy on the outside and chewy on the inside. Seeing this, everyone around couldn't help but drool with craving. Although Suman felt like eating, he still doubtfully reminded everyone, "No, wait, don't be fooled by its appearance." Someone else added, "But it smells really good." The guildmaster of Gola asked Lut doubtfully, "How strange. Do you also recover magic power when you eat?" He replied while smacking his lips as he chewed, "Old man, you see this? This isn't magic power, it's mana." At that moment, a strange yellow life force surrounded him. The guildmaster thought in confusion, did he say mana? It doesn't have the evil aura of the demon tribe, but instead feels somewhat divine. He turned to ask Lankas, "Lanas, we don't have much information about the monster in this dungeon. Should we temporarily retreat and wait for reinforcements?" He replied, "No. The longer we hesitate, the further the dungeon cycle will progress." After finishing his meal, Lut, now full of energy, clasped his hands to give thanks for the food. "It's great to have reliable comrades. We'll conquer this dungeon ourselves." After eating, he and Alicia walked and talked. "If the dungeon's layout hasn't changed, we should reach the boss room soon." Suddenly they stopped, exclaiming in unison. Everyone recalled the scene of their earlier escape and remembered something. Thinking back now, we completely forgot that the ceiling had collapsed. Lankas said, "We've come all this way, but for our survival, it seems there's no other choice but to turn back." Lut suddenly remembered something. "Oh, that's right." He then used his special skill, slapping the pile of rubble blocking the path. Earthquake opening. At that moment, a light shot up to the astonishment of everyone around. "I am the guildmaster," exclaimed in surprise. All the obstacles vanished in an instant. Lut was overjoyed. "Now the boss room is right ahead." He turned, clenched his fist excitedly, and called to everyone, "Let's go!" The whole party entered together, stepping through the door. Lut and Alicia's eyes widened at the strange creature before them. Before them was a giant, strangely shaped spherical monster. It was glowing brightly and covered in sharp thorns. Loncast said thoughtfully, "This is the egg of a divine dragon." Lute, stunned, turned and asked, "A divine dragon?" The man continued to answer his question, an image of a young dragon appearing in his mind. "I only know of its existence from books. It's a legendary dragon that reincarnates between life and death. When its physical body is destroyed, its soul reincarnates and is reborn within a dungeon. That place acts as its nurturing cradle." Everyone stared at the egg, bewildered. Even if its body dies, the knowledge stored within its soul remains perfectly intact. It's even said that it can understand human language. He continued, "They say it possesses the wisdom to see the future." Suman cracked his knuckles and shouted, "But in the end, it's just an egg." He excitedly raised his fist. "We just need to kill this monster before it hatches." Physical enhancement. "Wait!" Lana suddenly yelled. With a sudden lurch, Suman was violently flung away by the thorns surrounding the egg. He let out a cough as blood sprayed from his mouth. He clutched his stomach and collapsed, crying out in pain as his comrades rushed over in alarm. "Are you all right?" He suddenly looked up, trembling in fear, and stammered, It's moving." The thorny vines that had been wrapped around the egg were now standing up like legs. Everyone watched in a panic, unsure of what to do, as his comrades quickly helped Suman to his feet. "Damn it, I was too careless," Lankus added. "Is this the egg's self-preservation instinct? You should stand back, even if it's just an egg right now. This is a true dragon and our survival is on the line," Simone said, struggling to get up. Lute, meanwhile, was anxiously trying to recall something. He tried to use his appraisal skill to view the egg's information, but it was completely useless. Its stats were totally hidden. A man named Purple said to the guildmaster, "I think we should retreat. Wouldn't it be better to wait for reinforcements?" The guildmaster replied to him, "The moment that egg awakens, it won't matter how many S-class adventurers we have, we won't be able to stop it." At this very second, everyone steeled themselves ready to fight the divine dragon's egg. Lankus declared, "We'll finish it right here. Support me." Chrissy and Cuckoo began casting their spells at the egg, aiming for its legs. Lankus charged the egg as it dodged the other's spells. Seizing the opportunity, his face resolute, he gripped his axe with both hands and leaped, preparing to strike the monster. With a powerful whoosh, one of the monster's legs was cleanly severed. Lute cried out, shocked by the old man's incredible power. The monster roared in a mixture of rage and pain. Suddenly, the leg that the old man had just severed began to regenerate in the blink of an eye. He couldn't believe his eyes, it had regenerated. Lankus stared anxiously at the monster's spiky legs. How could it regenerate so fast? He quickly turned and called out to Lute, needing his help. "Lute, I need a favor." At that moment, inside the egg, the creature began to open its eyes. It let out a piercing scream, stunning everyone nearby, who quickly covered their ears. Mr. Lankas then charged towards the monster once again. He swiftly sliced off one of its legs. Suddenly, another leg erupted from the ground below. It wrapped tightly around his leg. He thought anxiously, it came from underground. If only I had a little more time. At that very moment, the guildmaster and Y rushed over. They severed the monster's leg and freed him. "Thank you." He acknowledged their help. This time, with firm resolve, he sent several of the egg's legs flying with a single strike, making it unable to stand steady. While the egg was still recovering, Alicia shouted. Now the creature inside the egg, startled, revealed its enraged face and roared. "Can you handle a sword infused with my entire mana pool?" As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped into the air, holding a long flaming sword overflowing with mana. He brought the sword straight down, splitting the egg in two with a single strike that dyed the air a brilliant red. Y and Lankus watched excitedly, thinking he had done it. Inside the egg, the figures of two monsters emerged from the bisected shell. Alicia noticed something was wrong and shouted. "The main body is unharmed." She commanded her spirit to appear. An explosion erupted as she unleashed her powerful skill, aiming directly at the egg to stop it before it could make a move. Thick smoke and dust billowed out from the force of her attack. Everyone quickly shielded their faces, then looked back at the egg. It was completely unharmed, without even a single scratch. The Gola Guildmaster yelled, "Did it regenerate before the blade of wind even touched it? We're not making any progress at all." Suddenly, the entire dungeon-like area began to darken. What is this intense chill? Everyone trembled in fear as the environment around them began to transform. Just then, the egg began to glow a brilliant red. It roared ferociously, emitting a terrifying light as Y lowered his hand from his face. The egg began to act strangely. Inside, the creature started to open its mouth, revealing razor-sharp teeth as it stared intently at the team. Alicia looked up, her voice filled with fear. "The divine dragon is about to hatch." Mr. Lankus shouted gravely, "We're out of time. Our survival depends on ending this right now." Everyone turned to look at him. "We will take it down in a single decisive blow." The enemy's regeneration skill is a threat, but its legs aren't very durable. He spoke while recalling the moment he had sliced the monster's leg. We all have to attack at once to create even a small opening. The guildmaster responded, "Leave the ones on the right to me." Y added, "And we'll take care of the ones on the left." Chris also stepped up. "Let us handle the ones in the front." Alicia replied, "We'll deal with the enemies to our immediate left." Without a hint of fear, everyone began to charge straight toward the monster. Suddenly, numerous sharp spikes emerged from the bottom of the egg. It began firing those spikes directly at the charging party. Eber and Purple halted their advance to dodge the incoming spikes. Gry began to cast his magic barrier. A magical shield materialized in front of Mr. Lankus, blocking all the incoming spikes with this defensive skill. He looked in surprise at the protective barrier. She stepped forward and said, "I will protect you. Just focus on your attack." Mr. Lankus was grateful. "I am in your debt." He raised his axe to the sky and roared, "Forward! Charge! Mana enhancement, your next attack skill will be twice as strong," Alicia reminded everyone. Lankus had already started using his shockwave. She cast a spell as she spoke, "But how can we possibly time it to break the monster's legs?" Lute yelled, "Leave that to me!" He began to use his unique skill, his eyes turning a glowing green. Behind him, the form of a giant creature appeared. He raised his hand and shouted, "Commander skill!" At that moment, his power entered the minds of everyone present. He called out, "Can everyone hear me?" Grazy smiled joyfully as he heard the voice transmitted directly into his mind. He said excitedly, "What an interesting skill!" Lute used his skill to broadcast to everyone, "We will shatter its legs. As soon as the countdown ends." Understood. Everyone shouted in unison. Lute began the countdown and all around people prepared to cast their spells. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All the monster's legs were severed simultaneously by everyone. Lute saw his chance and shouted, "Now!" At that moment, Lankus had finished preparing his power and was ready to join the fight. He bellowed, "Absolute void skill." The egg was blasted by his immense power, piercing a hole straight through its center. The monster's blood sprayed everywhere. The egg was completely defeated as everyone watched. Lankus gasped for breath, victorious. Suddenly, he collapsed from mana exhaustion. The guildmaster hurried to catch him. "Even though I hate to admit it, without everyone's help, we couldn't have defeated it." How arrogant. Just then, Cuckoo ran to Summon and reported that his life didn't seem to be in danger. Lute joyfully shouted to everyone, "This is our complete victory." While everyone was celebrating, Purple hid behind the monster's leg, muttering, "What a bunch of cheerful idiots." He glanced behind him. Now it's time to retrieve the Divine Dragon's magic stone and make a hefty profit. He searched for a moment, then wondered, "What the hell is this?" He then asked worriedly, "I can't find the magic stone anywhere." Suddenly, a spiky tail emerged behind him. He turned in horror to see the sharp tail lunging at him in an instant. It shot straight toward Purple, piercing through his chest. He screamed in agony before collapsing to the ground. A massive creature with sharp teeth suddenly appeared before him. It spoke to itself, "This rebirth was a failure, but not entirely useless." Its massive feet stomped the ground. "This body won't last long. I will have to wait for the next rebirth." It looked at Lute, who was talking with his comrades. "But first, the insects who dared to interfere with my rebirth must all die." Its eyes glowed, filled with furious rage. The guildmaster suddenly realized something. He quickly drew his sword and shouted to everyone, "It's not over yet!" The monster's presence hasn't vanished. The monster suddenly appeared before them, its body covered in blood. Facing the giant monster, Lute hurriedly used a skill to read its information, but it was completely useless. He trembled in fear and said, "How is it still alive?" Alicia answered, "It must have burrowed into the ground just as the attack occurred." And the monster roared in fury, "How insolent, only humankind would dare challenge a god." Lute stared at the monster in shock and shouted, "That monster can talk!" Lan explained, her face filled with concern. "It's the highest-ranking species of the true dragon clan, of being closest to the divine, that can understand human language." And the monster continued, "I sense a loathsome presence among you humans. Something between a human and a monster." It stood tall, spreading its arms. "Now do your best to entertain me, fear me, and then fall into despair." Chrissy considered for a moment, her 2 fingers beginning to cast a spell. "I'm sorry, but this is all I can do to help you." Skill Shadow Veil. The Shadow Veil skill conceals you completely by shrouding you in darkness. As she finished speaking, she vanished without a trace. Suddenly, to everyone's astonishment, one arm of the monster dropped to the ground. The monster cried out, looking at its arm as it began to crumble, causing one person to tremble in fear and look up at the monster, saying, "It's decaying." Lan said, looking at the monster with concern, "If we're going to fight it, now is the time." He thought to himself, "I just used it meaninglessly, I'd rather recover first." But Summon stared at the monster in terror. He thought to himself, "What in the world is that monster I can't fight that I need to run now?" With that, he bolted for the gate where they had entered. Seeing this, the monster raised its hand using its dark magic. Did you think I would let you go with telekinesis? It used its power to shatter the surrounding pillars. It hurled them straight towards where Suman was running. It used all the broken pillars to block everyone's escape route before him. You will not escape this dungeon chamber. Even with only my left hand, do you really think I'd struggle to crush a mere rat? It threatened them while casting its spell. Lankus gripped his axe, his voice like steel. If we can't escape, our only choice for survival is to show you how terrifying a cornered rat can be. The people around him shouted and charged toward the monster, preparing to begin the battle. Each person split up, fighting according to their own strategy. Lut and Lankus aimed for the monster's tail. The Guildmaster and Ibis targeted its back. Lut and the Guildmaster attacked and spoke in unison. Our attacks aren't connecting. The monster continuously dodged their blows. It feels like it's predicting all of our movements. The monster glared contemptuously and raised its voice. Is this all you can achieve? You'll have to put on a better show for me. With that, the monster roared as its dark power exploded. Skill heaven-splitting impact. The monster's power erupted in crimson sparks, blasting everyone nearby to the ground. Lut was thrown far away, crying out in pain. Seeing this, Alicia frantically called out his name. She rushed over to him, asking with concern, "Lut, are you hurt?" He struggled to push himself up from the ground, replying to her, "I'm fine." But that last exchange used up almost all of my energy. Without pausing, Alicia looked back and saw the monster preparing to attack again. She shouted, "Lut, I'm going to finish it in one blow with this spiritual power. Please inform everyone." Lut replied, "Understood." Lut used his ability to relay the message to everyone around them. Everyone were going to launch a massive attack. I'll send the signal, so get clear of it. The Guildmaster heard and replied, "Got it." Back with Alicia, she closed her eyes and began to channel her power. "Everyone lend me your strength." As she finished speaking, the scepter in her hand had gathered all of their power into it. On the other side, the monster was moving the broken pillars toward her comrades. Alicia finished casting her power and shouted. She used her skill and signaled to everyone that it was time to counterattack the giant monster. Right now, with Spirit Quintet, Alicia unleashed her full power directly at the monster. In the blink of an eye, the unsuspecting monster was struck directly by Alicia's explosive power. A massive explosion occurred. Ibot uncovered his face and hastily asked, "Is it over?" However, before their very eyes, the monster, despite having its limbs blown off, was still alive and staring directly at them. The Guildmaster simply replied calmly, "Not yet." The enraged monster raised its hand to retaliate. It roared, "Perhaps I was a bit careless." Alicia anxiously watched the unfolding situation. Suddenly, Lankus leaped up from out of nowhere, raising a large axe with both hands, ready to decapitate the monster. Unfortunately, the monster saw him and violently slammed him to the ground with its tail. Cuckoo worriedly shouted his name. "Lankus!" He ran forward, using his skill to temporarily bind the monster. Damn it, bind! Vines from his power erupted from the ground, wrapping tightly around the monster's body. At that exact moment, Ibot leaped up from behind, swinging his sword, ready to slash the monster. How about this? Suddenly, a cracking sound was heard. Unfortunately for him, the monster reacted in time, turning and snapping his sword with its jaws. Ibot thought with a look of horror, "I could have sworn I attacked it from a blind spot." Ibot was flung far away by the monster's tail, and the vines on its body began to crumble away. The monster used magic to levitate the scattered rocks around it, speaking with contempt, "There is no way a skill of this level can stop me. It is merely an annoyance." As soon as it finished speaking, it hurled those rocks straight at Cuckoo. Alicia, witnessing everything from afar, cried out in horror, "Everyone no!" Images of her comrades falling, dying tragically before her eyes, while she was powerless to help, flashed in her mind. She remembered and blamed herself. "It is all because I am not strong enough. This brutal fight for survival is happening all over again, and I could not save them." After dealing with Alicia's comrades, the monster turned and stared at her with a menacing gaze. Her eyes filled with fear and despair as she heard the monster's final threat, a sign of respect. "I will kill every last one of you and use you to nurture my intelligence." Lut, half kneeling, had a grim and troubled expression. "We are no match for it." The two stood before a strange statue, thinking if they could just buy some time, they could escape through the central magic circle of this dungeon. Then a horrified expression crossed Lut's face as he threw his hand out to stop something, shouting loudly, "Flow control skill." And then his steely gaze flickered with a hint of confusion. The monster appeared right in front of him at such a close range, and he was powerless, his heart filled with overwhelming anxiety. Lut's skill failed to activate. Is he out of energy? The hideous green monster was attacking everyone, inflicting immense damage. He gritted his teeth, his face a mask of helpless rage, but there was still a tiny glimmer of hope, thinking to himself, at this rate, our survival is impossible, we will be annihilated. He needs to recover his energy somehow. Suddenly Lute noticed something. A stream of thick slime was flowing from an eggshell. Then a thought struck him as he faced the petrifying breath. The ferocious green monster attacked, breathing fire. Alicia urgently commanded her sylph spirit, "Guardian Angel." The monster in turn strengthened its attack on Alicia. Then, from out of nowhere, the guildmaster of Gola stepped forward to join the fight. He unleashed a single powerful slash towards the monster, the blade soaring high. The battle for survival was fierce and brutal, with neither side giving an inch, a true principle of earth magic. Then a beautiful blue light erupted from the ground, a combination skill of air slash and water bullet. The light fiercely attacked both Alicia and the Gola guildmaster. He held his sword before his face, squinting at the hideous monster. The two adversaries faced off. He wondered how it possessed such a diverse skill set. The hideous monster glared at the two of them. "Well then, how about this?" An emerald light flashed in the monster's hand as it took a battle stance. "Time for your reward." The Gola guildmaster shut his eyes, not daring to look, but still managed to say, "That's Lankas's absolute futility." His mind raced. So this is the power of the Dragon of Wisdom. He squinted at Alicia and continued speaking. "But it must lack defensive capabilities if we counterattack." Now was the time, and Alicia's heart swelled with determination. She replied fiercely, "I'll help you." She raised her weapon and began to summon her power. Wakian's mistletoe. On the other side, the Gola guildmaster did the same, holding his sword with both hands and chanting an incantation with his eyes closed. "Water sword, thunderstorm sword, rain." And with that, he gripped his sword hilt and charged boldly toward the monster. "Take this!" The green monster's face was repulsive. The Gola guildmaster charged in like a moth to a flame. But then he realized something, though it was far too late. Damn it, it was a painful trap. The monster impaled him with a single strike and blood gushed everywhere. He immediately coughed up a mouthful of fresh blood. Witnessing this, Alicia was not just surprised and shocked, but utterly terrified. The Gola guildmaster collapsed to the ground before the monster. The look of utter shock never left Alicia's face. Then Alicia's spirit was suddenly pulled away by an unseen force. It was the monster restraining her sylph. It narrowed its eyes and said, "Such a rare spirit, I wonder what it tastes like." Without hesitation, Alicia immediately reached out to stop it. "No!" It opened its maw wide enough to reflect her terrified face and then snapped it shut. The monster had swallowed the sylph whole. Alicia, still frozen in shock at her failure to stop it, collapsed to her knees. Her grief was beyond words. "No!" The giant monster closed in on Alicia, pointing a sharp claw right at her. It was large enough to crush her completely. The monster began to taunt her. Normally, an attack skill like that is used against a stronger opponent in a dungeon, creating an opening at the cost of immense power. It then hooked Alicia with its sharp claw, lifting her up. It's completely unnecessary against weak little rats. "Do you know why I employed such a deceitful tactic?" Tears welled in Alicia's eyes as she mourned her spirit, but the monster continued gloating. "It was to save her, this very face twisted in despair." It looked at Alicia, intending to devour her, just as it had the sylph. It uttered its final words, now ready to satisfy the appetite of a true monster. The beast opened its maw to devour Alicia, its drool splattering everywhere. From out of nowhere, Lute appeared and dealt a fatal blow to this hideous monster, saving Alicia's life. After unleashing that incredibly powerful skill, Lute was half kneeling with his head bowed, panting heavily. Alicia worriedly called out his name. His eyes glowed as he let out a loud roar. And the monster, one of its eyes suddenly dropped out, a truly grievous injury. Lute had destroyed one side of its face, blood streaming down endlessly. Yet the monster still appeared calm, looking at him as its body was wreathed in roaring flames. What an imperfect body! Lute kept his head down and let out a soft groan, unable to control his new power. The monster continued in that same tone. "So you ate my eggshell and turned into a monster, did you?" "A massive amount of energy is flowing through my body." Nearby, Alicia remained extremely worried about his condition. "Are you okay?" But he suddenly shot up with a loud cry. He used his overwhelming power, a wild skill he could not control, to attack Alicia. She couldn't withstand the terrifying force and was sent flying, slamming hard into the wall. His eyes were now bloodshot as he let out a few groans, ignoring Alicia, who had just collapsed from the blow. Seeing this unfold, the hideous monster suddenly understood something, speaking to him in a provocative tone. "I see now. It's interesting that you can absorb so much energy but can't fully become a monster. However, you won't last long like this. You aren't even worth the effort." Lute lowered his head close to the ground, letting out a low growl. He thought to himself that his body was burning, feeling as if he was about to lose himself completely. His survival was on the line, as his body wouldn't hold out much longer. The view zooms in on his panicked face as a single thought raced through his mind. He was about to be consumed. Suddenly, a voice echoed from nearby. As Lute was engulfed in raging flames, Sai appeared behind him with a soft smirk. Your skill in controlling energy truly leaves much to be desired. She used her power, placing a gentle hand on Lute to offer her help. Let me help you. Then she gave him a light pat. After that touch, Lut's eyes widened as if he had just woken up, and he placed a hand on his chest. He could feel the flow of power within him. He thought to himself that he could finally sense the energy inside his body. The monster's eyes widened as it stared at Lute in utter disbelief. What is this? It was Sai, a cheerful smile on her face. She held out a sword with both hands. Here, go finish off that dying lizard. Lut stood there frozen, clearly confused. Who in the world are you? Unexpectedly, the giant lizard monster answered for her. You dare call me a god, a dying lizard? The lizard monster lunged forward, opening its wide maw full of hideous teeth and raising its claws to attack, roaring, You insolent insect, Sai! However, watched the reckless lizard with a nonchalant expression and muttered, These old-timers get provoked so easily. The two sides rushed forward to clash. Without a moment's hesitation, Lute seized the opportunity and brought his sword down with a single decisive slash. The lizard monster's entire body was now split in two, utterly decimated after that attack in the dungeon. Lut struck a cool pose as Sai cheered excitedly, a one-shot kill. Back in the gloomy darkness of the dungeon, the exhausted party members leaned against the walls, many of them severely injured. Lut was now trying to use his healing skill on Gola's guildmaster, gritting his teeth with effort. His expression hardened as he told the others, His wound is too deep. Sai added, Everyone except you and me is severely injured. We need to treat them quickly for any chance of survival. Even Lankus was lying there unconscious. Sumon and Cuckoo lay completely drained of strength. Chrissy looked toward Ibis, thinking it would be incredibly difficult to move with this many casualties. We'll have to wait for reinforcements, carry them into town one by one, or leave and call for help. But just then, Lute's eyes widened blankly. A sudden sharp pain pierced his chest, causing him to clutch it and cry out. With her arms crossed, Chrissy looked down at him, guessing that he was feeling the backlash from his power. Chrissy continued with the same expression, I used a special skill to help you contain your energy and temporarily amplify your power. But your body has reached its limit. Suddenly a voice rang out and both Lute and Chrissy turned to look. It turned out to be the lizard monster they had just slashed. You wretched scum, you won't be getting back alive. It was on the brink of death yet still spat out threats. Blood trickled from the monster's eyes as its pupils rolled back and it continued speaking. You're coming with me! Chrissy glared at the vile monster with disgust as the area began to crumble and shake. Lut realized the danger. He shouted, The dungeon is starting to collapse, Chrissy added. That thing was what was sustaining this place. Boulders large and small began to rain down as one of them shouted, Hey, we need to get out of here right now! Just then, Lut spotted a terrible danger. Huge boulders were falling right on top of Alicia's position, and he sprinted over to save her. He screamed in panic, Alicia! Luckily, Lut managed to scoop her up and get her out of the immediate danger. As if sensing the danger she just escaped, Alicia slowly regained consciousness, saw him and called out Lut's name. He replied in a panicked rush. We defeated that wise dragon, we're all going to get out of here. Alicia, having just escaped death, let out a dry cough but still managed to speak. We defeated that wise dragon, we're all getting out of here. Seeing her condition, Lute couldn't help but worry. Hey, are you alright? Despite her exhaustion, Alicia managed a reassuring smile. She told him, I've used up all my magic power, so I don't think I can move. But after a moment, her expression grew serious. Lut, listen to me. Your survival is paramount. You need to escape from here by yourself. Lute was completely stunned. What are you saying, damn it? Suddenly, Chrissy shouted at him, If you don't get out of here right now, you're going to be buried alive. She watched the two of them, seeing Lute still hesitating to leave his comrades. Grieving for his teammates, he replied, There's no way I can't just abandon my friends. Chrissy sighed with a look of resignation, seemingly giving up as she offered what felt like her final words. I like you, but you're making the wrong choice. Lute didn't understand and called out to her as panic started to set in. At this rate, we'll all be buried alive. At the very least, maybe if he could just carry Alicia alone. He thought about his comrades who had fought by his side through the whole battle, but it would mean abandoning everyone else. Lut couldn't do that, he had to find a way. He'd done a way to save everyone. Alicia's expression fell as she begged him. Lute, please, I'm begging you, just go. His voice trembled as he replied, I can't. Alicia suddenly screamed at Lute, desperate for him to get away from there as quickly as possible. I've already made my peace with this. Tears streamed from her glistening eyes because this was the wish of their comrades, because they all knew. Lankus then echoed Alicia's plea, telling him to run. Lud turned and called out his name, Lankus. The man continued, as long as you're still an adventurer. Losing comrades is inevitable, and it will happen time and time again. His face grew pensive for a moment. Lankus's voice grew sharper. If people are fated not to achieve survival, what do they have to boast about at the moment of death? These words made him pause and think, frozen in place. In such a critical moment, several strange giant monsters arrived. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A quick count revealed 6 of them approaching, with large toothy maws appearing from nowhere. He guessed the monster creatures within this dungeon had gathered. Lud, also surprised, turned and cried out. Abbas, who had now regained his composure, shouted to everyone, "Take your sword stances and prepare for battle. No one needs to die, I won't let that happen." Alicia leaned against the wall, forcing her body up, and shouted to Lud, "Run now!" The big-mouthed monster lunged to attack. As he severed the monster's arm, he replied to Alicia, "I will not." He still held his sword tightly in his hand. His voice was incredibly firm. "Until now, I've just called Misasa a trash sweeper. I looked down on you, Alicia, when you invited me to join your party, but when you accepted my secret, I was truly happy." Hearing this, Alicia was at a loss for words. The scene shifts to a happy memory, as if Lud was reminiscing. Lud began to feel nostalgic. "When everyone in the party accepted me, I was truly so happy." Lankus and Ibis were also lost in thought upon hearing this. Lud continued to speak his mind, abandoning the comrades who have accepted me and entrusted their duties to me. Then Lud shouted emphatically, "Like hell I could do that!" He remembered a distant memory from his past, the faint voice of a soldier saying, "Listen here, kid." And he smiled at him, saying that no matter how difficult or painful things get, the memory of the strong, stern face that comforted him faded as he returned to the present. Recalling the advice to never give up, Lud decisively gathered his strength and cut down several of the monster creatures. Alicia couldn't help but worry as she watched. Lud, suddenly something happened that made both Ibis and Alicia's eyes widen as they froze. He muttered that a huge number of monsters were attacking, appearing out of nowhere. Even the lizard monster that had just been defeated was among them. Lud, determined to face this for his survival, screamed internally that he would never give up. A monster opened its large maw, and from within a disgusting tongue, Lud charged forwards to fight this horde of monsters. He swung his sword, preparing to tear the beasts to shreds. But things rarely go as planned. The massive mouthed tongue shot out from the monster, heading straight for him. Lud sensed mortal danger. In a moment of carelessness, he dropped his sword and the large-mouthed tongue clamped down on his arm. Blood splattered everywhere. The tongue bit into his arm, lifting Lud into the air. Alicia cried out in worry. Lud gritted his teeth, his expression darkening. His will remained firm, he would not give up. Lud decisively let his body fall, ignoring the fact that the monster had just bitten off his arm. The skill auto-sever activated. He landed coolly and picked up his sword. He would not give up. Another skill. Regeneration activated, and his arm immediately grew back. He gripped the sword with both hands. The monsters began to sense that something was wrong. Lud's spirits were lifted, and with a battle cry, he charged forward. He thrust his sword straight into the hideous monsters. The main character's aura flared as he activated his battle cloak. He attacked while praying, his face hardening, "Please let this be the end of it." The monsters were also resisting Lud's assault, but he still wanted this ordeal to end as soon as possible. Kill every last one of them. Kill every last one of them. A sharp monster claw thrust right in front of him. Kill every last one of them. The monsters launched an attack that sent loot flying, but unexpectedly a large hand caught him from behind. He still couldn't believe his eyes. Leonis, the captain of the Lionheart Wings, praised him with satisfaction. "You did a good job, Baldy." He even reassured him, "Don't worry about a thing. Our survival is guaranteed and we will return." He and Leonis stood in a more dangerous situation than ever before, surrounded by heavyweight monsters in this dungeon. But Captain Leonis seemed certain of victory, to have failed at rebirth and even been parasitized by another monster. How pathetic, right? The monsters continuously rushed in with a barrage of attacks. Dark tendrils wriggled toward the two of them as if wanting to eat them alive. Lute watched uneasily as the danger closed in. Oh no, Leonis blocked those dark tendrils for him. Those other monsters weren't going to back down so easily. The opposing forces clashed once more, their powers locked in a tense struggle. Leonis then touched the golden monster's head, recalling something. Office, the Dragon of Wisdom. Do you remember? The story flashes back to the past, showing a golden dragon glowing with a brilliant aura. He spoke of the fierce battle from the previous year, when he also fought fiercely against the golden dragon. The past and present intertwine. He then continued his story. With that divine appearance of yours, you pushed us to our limits. His expression was grim as he looked at the hideous monster, witnessing its current state. And now just look at you. the monster could no longer endure his words and immediately flew into a rage, roaring for him to shut up. He wouldn't give them any more chances to attack. Captain Leonis raised his sword and with a single skill sliced the monster amalgamation in two. Lute witnessed the entire spectacle, completely stunned and dumbfounded. Amazing, the sight of victory had finally arrived and Lute was in awe of the man before him. This is an S-rank hunter. Having achieved his victory, he casually rested his sword on his shoulder. Just as he breathed a sigh of relief, boulders from the dungeon ceiling continued to fall non-stop. Lute's face tensed as he faced danger once again. Alicia was still trapped under the falling debris and hadn't gotten out. At that moment, Alicia, with an unreadable expression, shouted a warning to him about the danger. Freeze purgatory zone. Just as a massive boulder was about to fall on her, it suddenly stopped. Lute had reached Alicia's side in time, while she was still wondering how the collapse had stopped. This skill is... And it seemed another voice spoke up. It was Serena, who was complaining about the monster that had just been defeated. Some of these fearsome monsters are still groaning and it's disgusting. Her face was full of annoyance. Leonis smiled at Serena gratefully. Serena, thank you, but Serena just complained to him. Leonis, you're always too rash. Lute just looked on blankly. Two others who had just arrived also thought she had a point. They were members of the Lionheart Wings. That's right, I feel the same way. As for Serena, she turned to Lute and Alicia, and it seemed she recognized someone. She greeted Alicia with a delighted expression. Overjoyed to see a friend after such a long time. Alicia, it's been a while. Alicia offered her hand to Serena, calmly saying her name. Serena. Done complaining about Leonis and the monster, Serena simply moved on to her next complaint. Hey, you all look like a complete mess. She ordered August, who was standing behind her. Hurry and heal everyone. Hearing this, August was more than willing to help. Leave it to me. He cast a spell reciting the incantation for the Saint's Healing Ray skill. He stood up, raising both hands to the sky to channel the healing energy. As he continued the incantation, the feeling of pain in their bodies began to gradually disappear. Alicia and even Lancaster could feel the effects. Ibis, impressed by August's power, approached him and marveled at the wide range of this healing skill. Meanwhile, August smiled gently, focusing on healing the Gola Guildmaster. August channeled his magical hand toward the Guildmaster's wound, performing a high-level soul healing skill. After the treatment, the Guildmaster's complexion became healthier and his breathing grew more stable. Once the healing was complete, August didn't forget to inform and remind everyone, I have healed everyone's wounds. However, your stamina and magical power have not yet recovered. Please rest. Then he looked in another direction and added, however, there is one person who has turned to stone leaning against the dungeon wall. August seemed to be referring to this person. Those who have lost their souls cannot be revived. Leonis rallied everyone's spirits, signaling it was time to escape this monster-filled dungeon. The members of the Lionheart Wings began helping everyone out. August also lent a hand to ensure their survival. Leonis instructed those who couldn't move to lean on others for support. Another team member was even carrying 2 or 3 people at once. Lute supported Alicia. They smiled at each other, taking one last look at the bloody aftermath of their battle for survival, and with no regrets he said, let's go, time to go home. Their group finally left the dungeon, and by nightfall they'd stopped to rest by a fire. Leonis, holding a yellow gem, said, this is a fragment of Office, the soul of the Dragon of Wisdom. The gem emitted a faint, beautiful golden light. He continued to explain, after a long period of time it will repair its own soul and be resurrected. Leonis began to tell the story of the monster dragon Office. The Dragon of Wisdom was defeated by our Lionheart Wings 5 years ago. The captain stared intently at the fragment. Its soul was collected back then and was carefully guarded in the royal capital. Hearing Leonis's story, Lancaster couldn't help but be suspicious. But why did it resurrect in Verona, such a remote town? Leonis replied with an emotionless gaze. Recently, the royal capital's vault was infiltrated. Lancaster was shocked, unable to believe what he was hearing. What? Leonis's voice grew deeper and more serious. The resurrection of this Dragon of Wisdom was an artificial phenomenon created within the dungeon, orchestrated by someone. Lancaster's expression suggested he had an idea of who it might be. Meanwhile, Serena and Alicia were having a heart-to-heart conversation. Serena glanced at Alicia, expressing her regret. It's such a shame. If you joined the Lionheart Wings, we would be invincible. Hearing this, Alicia humbly replied to Serena, my level has dropped, and besides, my goals are different from everyone else's. She opened up to Serena about her feelings. This dungeon conquest made me realize my own powerlessness. Serena was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Leonis found himself thinking of her, Alicia. In the end, Serena couldn't convince Alicia to join her team, so she accepted and wished her friend well on her chosen path. Alicia is stubborn once she's made a decision, but I'm glad you feel that way. Thank you. Alicia smiled at her as she spoke. Then Serena glanced over at the men. Look at that! The members of the Lionheart Wings who called Lute a selfish leader. Two of them, August the quiet musclehead and the bookworm who knows everything. Then Serena threw a fit. So much male testosterone I could just die. Leonis immediately advised her to quiet down. Serena, be quiet. You're making Alicia's companions uncomfortable too. Lute sat there watching everything unfold before finally speaking up. When I was a child in Tai Village, a place east of here, you saved my life. Lute recounted the story of how Leonis had once ensured his survival. Lute's voice grew firmer and louder. You might not remember, but you are my hero. And it seemed Leonis did remember that story. So you're that boy from back then. Then he looked directly into Lute's face. You never gave up hope. The scene shifts to Serena and Lute, revealing the meaning behind Leonis's words. This girl, you see. If only I could have arrived to help sooner, she always regrets not being able to help the other villages. Along with that, August, leaning against a tree, continued. That's why she developed a habit of rushing into everything. It's a problem. So Leonis stood up cheerfully, extending his hand toward him, expressing his sincere gratitude. Thanks to your quick reaction, the damage from the dungeon phenomenon was minimized. You're already a talented adventurer. Lute didn't hesitate either. He stood up to shake Leonis's hand, filled with brotherly camaraderie, receiving praise from the captain of the Lionheart Wings. That's too much praise for me, thank you. Suddenly Lankus called out to him, Lute! Lankus stared thoughtfully at the fire before him. He confided, I'm also worried about the instability in the royal capital, thinking about strengthening Verona's defenses. I'm thinking of establishing a new guard unit. In his mind, the image of one person appeared, someone he trusted, and he made the offer. I want to entrust command of the guard unit to you. What do you think? Lute was a bit surprised. The confusion was clear on his face. Me command the guard unit? Serena smiled at Leonis. Meanwhile, he stared blankly ahead as if waiting for Lute's answer. Alicia was stunned to hear Lute being praised so highly. The campfire light illuminated one side of Lute's face. He answered seriously, That's a generous offer, but I must refuse. Lankus was silent for a moment, as if waiting for Lute to explain his reasons. Afterwards, seeing that Lute said nothing more, he finally replied, I understand, I'll respect your decision, but may I ask why? Lute frowned, recalling what happened during the expedition, dissatisfied as he reflected on himself. During this dungeon expedition, I could feel my own inexperience. Lute and his team went through many difficult battles. Teammates were injured, and he was even knocked away by a monster several times. He had to rely on others for rescue. Thinking of that, he hesitated, and Lute clenched his fists, blaming himself. I realized that without strength and a better skill, I can't protect my comrades. Alicia listened silently to Lute's confession. Her eyes filled with sadness. Lute stood up straight, looked at Leonis across from him, and shouted, Leonis, catching Leonis completely off guard as his name was called. Lute said, I became an adventurer because I admire you, but my level is still far below yours. But he promised with all his might, I will definitely get stronger and stand by your side. Then Lute turned to Alicia, who was watching with wide, innocent eyes, and made her a promise too. And Alicia, we will definitely conquer the Abyss dungeon together. She gave a happy and satisfied smile. Alicia raised her fist in a gesture of encouragement, her smile widening. All right, I'm counting on you. His teammate Lankus closed his eyes in acceptance, realizing the two still had a goal to achieve. Lute then shared his intentions with him. I plan to leave Verona to adventure and use this skill to become stronger, ensuring my survival. August suddenly appeared right behind Lute, whispering softly, How interesting. August's unexpected appearance sent a chill down Lute's spine. He seemed to sense something. His eyes glanced over at Lute as he remarked on a strange power different from his usual magic. This is demonic energy. His eyes narrowed dangerously, filled with a bit of curiosity. Demonic energy cannot stabilize within a human body. August grabbed Lute's chin, a fascinated smile spreading across his face as if he'd discovered something special. He asked, You've eaten a monster, haven't you? Hearing this, Leonis's eyes widened in shock. Lankus was just as astonished. Perhaps the news was just too shocking. Serena's expression immediately hardened, and she shouted a warning, Everyone get back! He's dangerous. Immediately after she made her move, razor-sharp shards of ice materialized from thin air, all of them aimed directly at Lute. August quickly dodged to avoid getting hit, but Lute stood frozen in place. Serena asked tensely, Hey, is what he said true? The sharp ice shards pressed against Lute's body, with one shard already resting against his neck. Lute gritted his teeth, breaking into a cold sweat. Serena said evasively, Depending on your answer. August raised a hand, sighing with a deadpan expression. Honestly, his green magical light could control plants, and the tree roots beside him began to tremble and grow longer. August stomped his foot and the roots instantly burrowed into the ground. A moment later, they burst up from the earth right under Serena's feet, causing her to cry out in surprise. "Hey!" The roots twisted together, forming a secure cage that trapped Serena inside. August touched the root cage, reassuring her. "Serena, calm down." Muffled cursing could be heard from inside, suggesting she was in no mood to calm down. Serena managed to poke her head out from between the thick roots. She angrily and loudly questioned him, saying that eating a monster is taboo, and there's no way it could be fine. August chuckled softly, explaining why he stopped her. "It seems he's a special case. I don't see any signs of him turning into a monster." He continued, "In fact, I can't sense any of the typical malice of a monster from him, though I can't figure out the reason why." Listening to August try to persuade Serena, Lute, the one at the center of it all, could only stand aside with a forced, awkward smile. Leonis walked over to him and sincerely apologized for his teammate's behavior. "Lute, please accept my apologies for Serena's rudeness." He then explained why they were taking this matter so seriously. "However, we are currently hunting thieves who broke into the royal capital's vault." By then, Serena was no longer as agitated as before. She accepted her fate of being detained and listened as Leonis spoke on her behalf. "Based on the traces of demonic energy left in the dungeon's storage vault, we believe a monster may be involved in this." Lud understood that if he didn't explain clearly, it would be difficult to resolve their doubts. He said seriously, "I will explain the situation." A moment later, in the forest by a flickering campfire, after hearing all of Lud's story, Leonis began to understand. "I see." At this point, Serena had been released. Alicia was patting her shoulder to comfort her. Everyone had gathered to listen to the story by the fire. Leonis mused, "So that was your key to survival in the contaminated village." He remarked that disease immunity is an exceptionally rare skill. August nodded in agreement. "Indeed, this is the first time I've ever heard of that skill, but it makes sense." Serena was now dejected. She bowed apologetically, speaking with frustration. "You broke Alicia's abyssal curse, and on top of that, Lud interrupted her, offering comfort. No, that was a normal reaction. August then suddenly approached Lud. Like an excited scientist studying a unique specimen, Lud, by consuming monster flesh, can replicate the monster's skill for himself. After getting a good look at Lud, August stepped back, leaning against a tree trunk, and began to analyze. In other words, just because he eats a fish monster, it doesn't mean he can breathe underwater. Leonis also joined in on studying Lud. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. He can acquire the skill, but he doesn't inherit the physical traits of the monster. Behind him, August nodded repeatedly, showing his agreement with this explanation. With that thought, he turned and asked, "Alicia, do you eat any monster?" Alicia was stunned. What, she thought to herself, eat a monster? Memories of seeing Lud eating a monster that looked incredibly delicious immediately flashed through her mind. She had craved it so much back then that her mouth had even watered. Alicia waved her hand, trying to dismiss the embarrassing image. She answered awkwardly, "Of course not. I've never even considered it." Fearing she was getting upset, Leonis explained more clearly. "No, I was wondering if aside from Lud eating monster flesh and absorbing demonic energy, could expand your own skill." Alicia didn't quite understand his meaning. "What are you talking about? That's essentially taboo. What if eating a monster turns you into a monster yourself?" However, Leonis looked serious as he addressed the issue. He shared his thoughts. "Not if you could recover by using the monsterization process as a sort of substitute." Alicia understood, letting out a soft, "ah," but said nothing more. Just then Lud spoke up. "That's impossible." He frowned slightly as he spoke on the matter. "There are only two possible outcomes from eating a monster, and that's either becoming a monster or dying." August stroked his chin in thought. "I see, so instead of becoming a monster, there's also a chance you'll just rot away." Lud recalled his own experience and continued, "The first time I ate a monster, its energy coursed through my entire body. And with that much power, it was obvious Lud couldn't control it." He said, "And I lost control." Lud's eyes filled with hatred, and he nearly lost all sense of his normal self. "Back then, only the thought of revenge against those who betrayed me kept my body moving." After finishing his story, Lud didn't forget to add an important piece of information. "Now I no longer suffer any side effects when I absorb demonic energy." August observed Lud, intently making his assessment. It seems his body has adapted to the demonic energy. Recalling the time he suffered a backlash, Lud provided more information. Besides, there had been a previous case where a substitute vessel had failed. Leonis dazedly processed this unusual information. "I understand there's much we don't know about demonic energy," August concluded. "It seems we shouldn't meddle with it carelessly." Suddenly, Leonis's expression shifted slightly and he fell silent. He stood up, looked at Lud, and made a proposal. "That power of yours, can you show it to me?" Leonis gripped the hilt of his sword. I understand the theory, but there's still so much we don't understand about demonic energy. If we want to learn more about it, he looked at Lud. Why don't we let our swords do the talking? Faced with Leonis's challenge, Lud was a bit nervous as his opponent was clearly much stronger than him. Leonis drew his sword, his expression filled with excitement for the duel. After all, we're adventurers, aren't we? In the dead of night, a strange noise suddenly echoed through the peaceful forest. The resounding noise startled the horned rabbits into a panic. Level 8 horned rabbits. It seemed they had seen something as they continuously bared their fangs and brandished their claws aggressively. It was Leonis and Andu who had swiftly appeared before them, causing the horned rabbits to tremble in fear. Their eyes held a pitiful glint as if they were begging for mercy. In the next instant, the scene changed to herb-roasted horned rabbit. Lud expressed his gratitude as he ate. Thanks for the meal. He praised it continuously while chewing. This is really delicious. Acquired the jump skill from the rabbit monster. Serana watched Lud's ravenous eating and spoke up. It's completely unfair, isn't it? Unable to hide her own hunger, she said resentfully, we have to use items or rest to recover our own magic. Alicia, who was just as hungry, replied, recovering magic just by eating is so convenient. After finishing his meal, he became re-energized and declared, all right, my magical power is fully restored. Seeing this, Leonis asked curiously, are you sure you're all right after eating that? Lud quickly replied, thanks, I'm actually in perfect condition now. Following that, August began to cast a spell as he spoke. This hidden field transports its targets to a special dungeon-like dimension filled with the power of nature. No one can interfere with this space, and it only activates with the permission of the one being transported. He gently gestured for them to enter. Please step inside. Lud immediately complied, stepping through the gate into the space within. The lush and peaceful scenery inside left Lud utterly stunned. Next, August firmly stated, no one can disturb us in here. As he finished speaking, he waved his hand, creating a small flame. August continued magnanimously, you can go as wild as you like. Now unleashed, Leonis threw off his cloak and spoke. Now gathering his power, he asked enthusiastically, shall we begin? As soon as Lud was ready, Leonis announced, don't hold back. His confident words and the powerful surge of his magic made Lud's eyes widen in astonishment. Immediately after, he quickly activated his skill, summoning a giant bee monster. This technique didn't frighten Leonis in the slightest. On the contrary, it only made him more excited. So, this is your skill. To think you can truly control a monster's abilities. Leonis immediately raised his sword to block the attack, his survival instincts kicking in. Not getting a single second of rest, Lut lunged into the silk web. Fortunately, Leonis managed to slash the spider's trap to pieces in time. He raised his voice in a taunt. Is that all you've got? Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the opposite direction, causing Leonis to stop short in surprise. The moment he realized it, Lut was already poised to strike from behind. This was the paralysis breath skill, but not about to let him succeed. Leonis instantly shattered the skill. How naive, he said with a smile. A simple trick like that could never hurt me. While Leonis remained comfortable in this battle of survival, Lut was already nearing his limit. He launched a continuous barrage of attacks at him, desperate to end the fight quickly. Seeing this, Leonis explained without hesitation. You rely too much on your skill and your footwork is clumsy. Lut couldn't believe his eyes, utterly confused. The paralysis skill didn't work. Leonis calmly corrected him. No, it worked. It's just that veteran dungeon explorers have high resistance. In the blink of an eye, Leonis swung his sword, knocking the boy flat on his back. He spoke as if to end the fight. Take this. In that critical moment, Lut secretly activated a defensive skill. Harden. Even so, it seemed to have no effect against Leonis's overwhelming power. The strike sent Lut flying as he cried out in pain. Before he could even recover, Leonis approached to explain, many a monster possesses a natural resistance to certain status effects. Leonis continued his lesson, don't be overconfident in your skill. His words falling on deaf ears, Lut stubbornly charged forward again. The sight made him frown in annoyance. Are you kidding me? Without a moment's hesitation, Leonis retaliated. The blow knocked him to the ground with a groan. That really hurts. Despite being thoroughly beaten, Lut refused to give up on his survival and pushed himself back up. His expression remained unchanged as he let out an impressed sigh. Ho! As Leonis watched the scene unfold, he grew curious. You're channeling your magic into your sword, aren't you? As if to confirm his suspicion, Lut leaped high into the air. So you've decided to use the horned rabbit monster skill you just acquired. Without a hint of worry, Leonis only grew more excited. The skill from that monster from before, huh? This little devil has a lot of power. While he remained at ease, Lut was using every last bit of his strength to prepare a critical strike. The ground where they fought suddenly erupted. The massive explosion made August jump in alarm. The clear blue sky was suddenly blanketed by thick billowing smoke. Beneath the smoke, Leonis stood victorious over the defeated Lut. But with a reckless attack like that, you'll never be able to hit us. And despite his victory, he remained composed. Your monster skill might be powerful, but you lack any real close-quarters combat ability. That final attack might have hit a large monster. After pausing for about 2 seconds, the tip of Leonis's sword gleamed, illuminating the boy's surprised eyes. Leonis quickly helped Lut to his feet and continued speaking. God, but in a one-on-one fight against a person, it'll never work. Lut obediently agreed. Yes, sir. Then Leonis held out his hand, asking a question that surprised Lut. You've heard this all before, haven't you? While Leonis explained, he also demonstrated a critical survival skill, showing the boy how to circulate magical power through his body to enhance his physical abilities. Leonis's words made Lut's eyes widen as he remembered something. Immediately after, images from a past dungeon trial began to surface in his mind. Lut gradually grasped how to control the magic, recalling the sensation from that fight with a monster as if he had finally reawakened the skill. He closed his eyes tightly, feeling the magic course through his entire body. Even though his words said otherwise, his face couldn't hide his joy. Oh no. Seeing that he had grasped the method, Leonis exclaimed, You're a really fast learner. Although he had just learned the skill, Lut was as eager as when he first begged. One more time, please? Leonis didn't hesitate to oblige. All right, come at me with everything you've got. Seeing their fighting spirit made August unable to stop smiling. They then lunged at each other, training relentlessly. Not yet. Outside the barrier, while Alicia was spacing out, something suddenly caught her attention. It was the sight of Leonis helping a battered Lut out. Lut, despite being bruised, he looked cheerful, praising him as expected of an S-rank adventurer. I was completely defeated, he admitted generously. Your diverse skill set and adaptability are incredible. You even managed to scare me a few times. At a loss for words, Lut called out to Leonis. Before anyone could react, he bowed decisively in gratitude. Thank you so much. Despite Leonis ignoring him, Lut still tried to explain. You were pointing out my weaknesses and habits during combat, weren't you? You were training me. Ondu spoke up slowly for the first time. You know Leonis is just an awkward guy. Hearing this, he immediately retorted, As if I'd do that for you. Ondu's voice startled him, and Lut thought to himself that's the first time he's ever spoken. Just then August approached and cut into the conversation, leaving Lut utterly baffled. Anyway, Lut, about your ability to eat a monster, make sure you don't tell a soul about it. He delivered the shocking information in a voice as light as a feather. If the royal capital finds out your survival isn't guaranteed, you'll certainly be executed. Hearing the shocking news left Lut stunned and horrified. Executed. Nevertheless, August slowly explained. The closer you get to the royal capital, the stronger the church's influence becomes. To them, the Holy Scripture is absolute, and among its teachings, consuming a monster is the ultimate taboo. He then quickly interjected, but with my skill, I can neutralize it. Right? He remained calm, smiling lightly as he replied, Even if that's the case, the act of going against the Holy Scripture's teachings is a sin in itself. As Alicia watched and Serena stood stunned, August continued, They are clerics with narrow minds. Those people don't understand the true nature of things. He asked curiously, Who else knows about this secret? Besides the adventurers on this dungeon conquest? Hearing this, Lut immediately answered no. I know it's the ultimate taboo. He thought pensively, until today, besides Alicia. I've kept this hidden from everyone else. As this thought crossed his mind, an image of Zem appeared. Immediately after, Lut suddenly cried out. Both he and Alicia remembered at the same time and said in unison, Doim. The scene shifts to the city where Doom is proudly holding a sword. After so much research, it's finally complete. Both Lut and Alicia then entered the city of Barona. The dwarf's hammer. He stated with a stern, resolute expression. I don't care. While they smiled lightly, Doim asserted, Whether it's a taboo or not, I couldn't care less what other people eat. Don't worry, I won't go around blabbing about it. Suddenly he lowered his head, his voice growing grave. More importantly, Doim gloomily gritted his teeth, his tone threatening. After asking me to forge this sword, you're telling me you don't need it anymore. His frustration made the boy drop to his knees in profound apology. I apologize for the request. Despite his guilt, Doim slowly spoke of a sword that wouldn't break even when magical energy was channeled into it. I faced the difficult challenge in my own way. A gloomy aura surrounded the old man, but in the end, I finally completed it. Seeing this, Lut broke into a cold sweat. The old man was furious. She also trembled as she replied. Of course he was angry. Immediately after, Doim spoke up with a request. Can you grant me one request? Without a moment's hesitation, Lut immediately agreed. Anything. Joy began to spread across the old man's face. Could you let me touch that sword? Dome's unconcealed joy made Lute pause for a second. The answer was no. Lute glanced at the red circle on the sword and tried to stop him. This is a cursed sword, a terrible monster of a blade. Anyone who touches it will lose their mind. Lute's explanation didn't reach the old man's ears in the slightest. This is my only request. And I haven't even complained. Didn't you say you would do anything cornered Doom resorted to a threat? I hear you have a healing skill for others. Correct. Lute still tried to reason with the stubborn old man. It's too dangerous. If you lose consciousness, my replacement skill might be rejected. Dome didn't care in the slightest. He flatly stated, I don't care. If I get possessed, just destroy me along with it. The old man's sheer recklessness left Lute at a loss. Don't say such reckless things. Immediately after, Lute scratched his head and pursed his lips, weighing his options. With no other choice, he reached back helplessly. I understand. If you're going to insist. Unexpectedly, Alicia called out to him. Are you really sure about this? At the same time, Dome was more than ready. I've been a blacksmith for many years, but I've never seen a weapon that can absorb magical energy. This is a challenge worthy of betting my life and my survival on. He reached out and took the sword. The moment he held it, Dweme's expert eye realized this was no ordinary steel. With the eager mind of a true artisan, he exclaimed in constant admiration, the darkness hidden within the cold, sharp blade. It's almost alive. A sword where madness and beauty coexist. I've never seen anything like it. As if mesmerized, Dome stared at the red circle on the blade. Incredible, is it truly alive? He was deeply moved and set a new goal for himself. One day I too will forge a sword like this. Suddenly he froze as if he had seen some terrifying vision, like he was lost in another world. Dome thought, what is this? When suddenly his eyes shot open to a demonic scream. Kill! Kill! As the sounds echoed, an image appeared before his eyes. A red-eyed monster held a frail, white-haired person as if about to snap their neck. Kill! 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 It seemed the killing intent radiating from the sword made Dome tremble. Kill! In a flash, Lute reacted, snatching the sword back and casting his replacement skill. He clapped Dome on the shoulder, checking on him. Dome, are you all right? It seemed the old man hadn't fully recovered his senses yet. I'm sorry for making you indulge my selfishness. Dome broke out in a sweat, thinking to himself. What was that illusion? He immediately spoke up to stop the others from worrying. I won't say anything. It would only hinder your success, so rest assured. Dome's voice rang out firm and resolute. I will also forge a blade that surpasses even that one. The scene changes to a forest where Lute spoke in a relaxed tone. He asked Alicia, wondering if she really pulled out all the stops to rent everything. She replied with a bright smile, I've spent years constantly being pursued, so I'm happy to finally be able to relax. Next, Lute gently pointed out, and you're using Sinfit and Noemiya as carriage drivers without any hesitation. Alicia quickly explained, I could have arranged for a driver, but considering Lute's meals, he quickly looked off into the distance and asked a question. So where are we going? What kind of town is Isia? She described it with such enthusiasm, it was as if the town was right before their eyes. The seaside town of Isia is a place brimming with life, thriving on its fishing and trade industries. Then Alicia excitedly announced their itinerary. We have 2 objectives as we head to Isia. First, for Lute to acquire a new skill. As she was explaining, it was as if mysterious creatures were appearing right before their eyes. The underwater temple dungeon near Isia has many types of monster, different from those in Verona. You should be able to acquire a lot of skills from that dungeon. The king crab uses an incredibly powerful skill called Steel Body. Lute immediately caught the humorous point and wondered, Steel Body, an upgraded version of the hardened skill. Hearing that, Alicia replied confidently, even attacks from high-level adventurers can't get through it. I remember having a hard time with its toughness. She returned to their busy itinerary. The second objective, the revival of Yuya. As soon as Alicia finished speaking, an image from the past flashed in his mind. Ignoring Lute's surprise, she continued to speak. The underwater dungeon is the place where Yuya was born. By reviving Yuya, I will also become stronger. He stared intently at the small, curious fish. So this is Yuya, wasn't it eaten? Alicia patiently replied. Spirits don't have a physical form initially, so even if they get hurt, they don't disappear. She continued playing with Yuya in her hand. We need to restore its energy within the underwater dungeon so it can regain its true power. That's right. Suddenly, Alicia's voice grew quiet and hesitant. Besides, it turns out she was hungry. Isia has a lot of delicious fresh seafood. Then Alicia suddenly recalled a question and said, now that I think about it, when we left Verona, didn't August give you something? Hearing this, Lute immediately answered, this thing, right? In an instant, he took out an old-looking notebook and looked at it while reminiscing. What is this? August had said gently. This is a journal left by a count who researched monster cuisine. Lute asked in confusion. Monster cuisine? August was still gentle. Perhaps it will be useful to you. Hearing that, Lut expressed his immense gratitude. Thank you very much. Suddenly, Leonis also rushed over and put his arm around his shoulder. Lut, I'm expecting great things from you. Immediately after, Lut was deeply moved. Leonis, images from the past when they walked together through the peaceful forest continued to surface. The cheerful conversation was overflowing, and the laughter never stopped. The words of encouragement continued to surface one after another. As dusk began to fall, it was time for them to part ways. The handshake between Lut and Leonis seemed to say everything about their feelings for each other. After that, Lut and Alicia had cheerfully waved goodbye to the Lionheart Wings party. Returning to the present, he was staring intently at his hand. She gave him a curious, teasing look. Have you never thought about adventuring with Leonis and the others? Not even once. He immediately panicked. Girl, what are you talking about? Seeing him lose his composure, she teased him even more. You're panicking, that's so suspicious. Feeling completely helpless, he gave up. Just give me a break. Despite their peaceful moment, a terrifying monster's roar suddenly echoed through the forest. A girl pale with fear fell to the ground. Immediately after, a man sweating profusely turned his head, his voice stammering with the desperate need for survival. Run. Although a monster had him chained by the neck, he still desperately tried to run. The girl remained stunned, seemingly lacking any survival skill to react to his warning. Just as danger loomed, the pack of monsters from the dungeon approached from behind her. It seemed the girl, possessing no combat skill, could do nothing but scream when facing the ferocious pig monster. No, M.